Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 115 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Hope you're having a wonderful week. Hope you're enjoying the slightly better weather this week. Although we've had some pretty sad news this week as well. I just wanted to send my condolences about the tragic death of Ava Twomey, who tragically died recently, lost her battle with epilepsy, it would seem. Although from all statements, she died peacefully in hospital, surrounded by family and loved ones. So for all it's a tragically short life, I think at least she had a good death. So yeah, my thoughts go out to Vera and the whole family as well. So yeah, just wanted to share my condolences there. Also, Milo Young died earlier this month. I've not been on social media, so I haven't paid much attention to this, so I do apologize. The founder of Big Butter Cheese, the man behind Big Butter Cheese, some contentious nature around the Exodus and that. We're not going to go into that at this point. But his work around with blue cheese, cheesel, and other such like the Hayes cheese genetics, really set a staple and a marker for that kind of evolution of the so-called skunk genetics in the early days. So yeah, big respect and rest up to Milo and all love to his friends and family. Jumping on to today's guest, we have Neil Cartwright. Damn it, I never tell you the name first. I've ruined it. Today's guest is, there you go. I might edit this out, or I might just leave it in so you can have a nice laugh at me within 5 minutes of us sitting and recording this, folks. So yeah, today's guest is the head of product buying at the Releaf Group Ltd in Australia, one of their largest medicinal cannabis clinics. They are currently operating out there, potentially moving into New Zealand, and at some point also here in the UK. So very interested to have a conversation with today's guest, who is Neil Cartwright. How are you doing, man?
Doing very well, thank you, Simpa. Yeah, and I echo those sentiments from before. Both. One is tragic, and the other, I was sitting next to him at Amsterdam. Sophie pointed him out. I was sitting right next to him, and she goes, "Oh, there's the guy who invented cheese." I was like, "Oh, wow!" And then a month later, sort of brings it all home, doesn't it? That life is short, and get on with it.
It sure is. It really is. We all seem to move so fast in this space that we forget that we're all aging. You know, we're all going, what's 5 years? What's 10 years? It's worth fighting. And then you're going, shit, wait, I'm 5. I'm 10 years older than I was.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's all moving pretty quick. So, yeah, it's been tough. But like I say, we send the best that we can out to the friends and families. I'm not a thoughts and prayers man, but Ava and the family have been in my mind because I met Vera quite a few years ago when she was really early on in her journey, and to watch the real movement to the tidal waves that she created with her activism to help her daughter, I think is commendable. It's wow. It's highly respectable. So yeah, let's move on a bit, because I'm aware that today's episode for some of my audience is going to be brilliant for them because it's a bit shorter than usual. We have a bit of a time constraint, but we've both kind of messed this up over the past few weeks. I say that we've had to cancel last minute, so we're going to get this on record, damn it, and it's going to be fun. So without further ado, let's launch into the first question, which is my cliched question that I ask, I guess, most people, especially, mainly the people working in the cannabis space. So when and how did you first get involved with cannabis?
Yes, it's interesting for me to answer that because it takes me back on my journey, because it's not something you sit and think about very often. And so, it's been long. My association was from university days that I'm sure a lot of people can share that, at student parties and sitting in other people's rooms. So it's been a long association, but it's when I went into the music industry, and obviously within music, the relationship between music and drugs is obviously very, very tight. To the extent that I'd say 90% of the industry is driven by whether it's using drugs to make music or making music to take drugs to, which is, half of the industry is just creating music to get high on, right? So there was all those characters. And through my time in music, I met Gary McKenzie, who was then working in Southeast Asia. So he was working with a lot of record labels, independent record labels in Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, blah, blah, blah. He then went on to form Releaf in 2019. And he invited me to join him halfway during COVID, so 2021, which then explains why we've got links in Thailand. We're talking to representatives from Malaysia. We know what Cambodia and Vietnam are doing. Indonesia, we can't see that changing for a while. But so Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia are the areas where I've got knowledge and know-how, and all of those are moving at different speeds. Thailand, obviously, is well known for its very rapid change, which might be rowed back a little bit now because of the changing government. But the signs are that the new government are not going to sweep everything away, which was one fear. They're saying that, no, it's going to be regulated. As long as you are within the regulations, then you will play ball. But if you just got a van, and quite literally, you know, if you've got an ice cream van stuck outside on the street selling cannabis, which is now common in Bangkok, that's what they're going to crack down on. So so we've got knowledge of how it's all moving in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, Thailand. We'll pause on Thailand for sort of a minute there, because it's really interesting. Obviously, they had an election, but not a few weeks ago. Quite interestingly, it's their more democratic, more progressive parties, anti-military, anti-monarchistic, have formed the majority coalition government. Yet they're quite opposed to cannabis in a certain way. Everything else, they're very socially liberal, classically social liberal. But then cannabis and drug policy, and I can kind of understand why in a certain way. They've seen what changed in June, how fast this changed. I mean, my last look at the numbers 2 weeks ago, I think, was 1.38 million. So 1,380,000 people have registered already as home growers. So you're not putting that genie back in the bottle. You've then got, like I said, all the street vendors and everything else. You've got brands like Cookies and others that, for all the Thai government laws, are actually meaning it's a lot more difficult to operate wholly and own the full shares of a business in Thailand. There are means and ways that they're getting around this with partnerships and with SPACs and various other things, special purchase acquisition companies. For anyone that doesn't know what a SPAC is, and just in case that just hit your ears really funny, and through various underhanded, really sort of neoliberalist capitalist methods. And the Thai nationals themselves, I read quite a bit. Admittedly, it's difficult because the translation into English from the Thai newspapers makes it quite difficult. Trying to keep an eye on what's actually happening on the ground. For all there is a lot of money, a lot of people feel that they're missing the opportunities. And I think my hope is here that this Move Forward party, the majority head of the government, are going to take that on board and go, okay, let's do this for Thailand, as was initially promised by the previous government, because I think they let it go too heavy. And I'm saying that as somebody who's like, let's end this immediately. There has to be some form of ring fencing and regulation, because you can't have air quotes legalization in a vacuum. It just doesn't work with all of those neighboring countries. I mean, as you said, with Malaysia, they've paused their death penalty. Singapore, just down the way, they've just killed 2 within 3 weeks of cannabis smugglers. And they killed, 11 the year before, all ethnic Malays. I'm actually speaking with a human rights lawyer at the minute who's just been disbarred for 5 years because he basically called out the Singaporean government and said that this is institutional racism. They make up 13% of the population in the nation, yet 67%, 68% of them are on death, make up the death row.
On really spurious evidence as well,
And they just went, 5 years, can't speak, can't do shit. And so, the whole region, as you said, it's such a mishmash, but what you do in one dramatically affects the others. They're not really hard borders. A lot of this is jungle, is open land. It
is. It's very fluid. And obviously what happens in Thailand does reverberate around the whole area. But we've been working with cannabis farms in Thailand, northeast Thailand, which is quite a the shape of Thailand, it's sort of insane, isn't it? That it's hundreds of miles, if not 1,000 miles. And this farm is right in the northeast. Well, this farm's been going 60 years. This is so. Although Thailand were fairly notorious for having a tight regime, that was really based on the tourists who were smoking joints on the beach. The locals were Thai traditional medicine has used hemp and cannabis for centuries, and they continue to use it. And the Thai sticks were being produced on a local basis anyway for Thai local users. So there's always been a cannabis industry within Thailand, even when the police were cracking down on backpackers. The two things were very different. So these guys, it went recreational. There were all these people piled in, not least American and Canadian companies who obviously are very quick into all these emerging markets. And the Thai local producers were, well, what's in it for us if all these companies are going to take over that rec market? So this move forward government have said they're going to regulate, they're going to scale everything back and make sure it's all legal, hopefully giving the local growers a foot in, which also then brings up another interesting aspect, which is we've looked at the Thai product, and it's very different to the product that we are used to, because what we see now in the UK market, when you go to the fairs, the festivals, the cannabis community festivals, it's dominated by the same strains that you see in the Californian market and the Canadian market. It's quite heavy THC, tends to be indica dominated. In Thailand, it's still very much the landrace sativa. So squirrel tail, foxtail, tiger tail, golden trichome, and purple sticky rice. Those are the 5 main strains. They're around 15-16%. It's quite a different product than the one we're seeing in the UK and American market. So whether that product is going to find a hold competing against the higher THC indica strains is remains to be seen, right?
Yeah, I mean, we desperately need diversity within the genetic gene pool of cannabis. This is something that's been said. The global war on prohibition, and since the middle of the 70s when global eradication began, I mean, you're talking cumulatively billions with a B of plants have been eradicated. And so the amount of dead ends, genetic dead ends that's caused, and all these plants being seized and destroyed, mothers that have been kept lovingly for decades, in bedrooms, clandestine grows that then get lost, and that lineage is gone,
But I would not to defend it, but let's take the story of Mull and Bimby, because Mull is our sister company. We run a company called Mull Cafe in Melbourne. And Mull is short and Mull and Bimby Madness, which in the 70s, to give you a little bit of historical context, back in the early 70s, Nimbin, the Nimbin Festival, was the Australian equivalent of Woodstock. And it was on this very remote, you got to imagine this was the early 70s, quite a remote part of Australia. It's actually the very easternmost tip, Mull and Bimby and Nimbin. And all the surfers and the hippies and the dropouts all went to this big festival in the early 70s, and a lot of them remained. And that's why Nimbin and Mull and Bimby are still to this day, the sort of spiritual home of cannabis in Australia. We spoke about the Mardi Gras, that's why it's still in Nimbin. And Mull and Bimby is quite a mountainous area. Now, I can't give you the name of the guy, but when I was in Melbourne, he came from Mull and Bimby, just one of those crazy coincidences. I was telling him the story. Yeah, I'm from Mull and Bimby. No way. And he says his brother is still involved in the illegal growing in Mull and Bimby, and it's all in the mountains. It's very like Humboldt, if you've been to Humboldt in California. Yeah. Those mountains and the trees, they make very good hiding places. So all those farms are still there. And this guy said he didn't wear any clothes until he was 10. He used to run around naked and they lived in the trees. He said it was all tree houses. So even if the police did arrive, they would just all run into the trees and disappear. So I have to go there one day. I haven't been yet, but that whole area is fascinating. I digress. Mullumbimby Madness was a big landrace sativa that we think was based on Colombian gold or a Thai. It was a landrace strain. It grew to 25 foot high. If you see photos of it, they're like trees. Mm. And what happened was the genetics just gradually disappeared, because in the 70s and 80s, people didn't realize about the mother plant, the cloning, the tissue culture, all these things just weren't understood. And the genetics gradually just became diluted. Mm-hmm. It's taken me 3 years, but I've now finally tracked down Mullumbimby Madness. I mean, that's another story in itself. How those seeds were taken from Australia via Netherlands, where the first seed companies were made in the mid-80s, and these guys collected all these seeds, the archive seeds. You reckon this guy who's got Mullumbimby reckons he's got the 12 original seeds that all our strains are based on. Now, whether that is true or not, I don't know, but it sounds like a great story.
Well, if you look at it as like mathematical branching, or just like if you think of genes like in parental lineage, if you track it back, I mean, you look at things like as you were speaking of, a lot of the landrace, I mean, obviously it's quite contentious stuff at the minute. Obviously the Soviets, while I keep bringing this up, in the 80s, they kind of were doing some work around about 13 different subcultivars and genus of cannabis sativa L. At a time when the world was kind of sitting on 3. Now there's obviously a lot of people in sort of the northern Afghan region, Pakistan, in China and Tibet, those kind of regions, that are trying to map the various different like broad types for us. Word hemp, branching it down and breaking up. As we're looking back through this, effectively there is common ancestry of all of these plants. And then when you look at like the British, as I kind of roughly mentioned when me and Ed Rosenthal were talking about this, taking these genetics around the world as part of the building of the empire, would then grow this resource that would then acclimatize. They would escape. The genetic would then just escape. Cannabis is a wild flower. Cannabis seeds, when itself hermaphrodizes and pollinates a plant, can produce tens of thousands of seeds. If you miss that plant, it falls into the ground. The seeds can lay dormant for decades and then pop up again. But in that time, it acclimatizes in a way. It's not necessarily rewriting the code of the seed, but then if it survives that cycle of life, it's got a much better opportunity for when it does germinate and come into the plant. And then if that runs through a similar cycle unimpeded, you end up with these acclimatized, what do they call them? Halfway between, not land, it's somewhere between landrace and like clandestine, like moving genetics. I can't remember what the word is. I want to say it's loom something.
You'll have to edit it in. Leave a gap and then edit it in.
All right, guys, if I haven't edited this in, I couldn't think of it. So whatever it is, I'll figure it out. But so these are the genetics where the lineage then sets a new track, as it were, because it's acclimatized to that environment. So it branches off from that direction of evolution of those genetics. And then obviously, as people have fucked around more and more, we've explored some dead ends and lost some things. But as you say, there's still that more of the breeding. And I think as we come to know more about this plant, I think eventually through CRISPR and other techniques, they're going to be able to reconstruct genetics. Obviously, my hope, and obviously, again, the argument that I guess me and Ed Rosenthal had about this the other week on the podcast was I still want it to be floral based. I want it to come through the plant. I think there's something to the entourage effect and the other synergy of all of the other components within the plant. Whereas Ed's idea was to produce through yeast and modification and other modification of things. Which again has exactly there's room for all things. My hope is to always be able to grow and nurture a cannabis plant, because from the tiny seed to that process has softened me. It's made me kinder, nicer, gentler. It's connected.
Yeah, and it's fun to do, isn't it? But I suppose, on another digression, you've got me on my soapbox a little bit. I get approached by a lot of suppliers, and also spend a lot of time going to the cannabis fairs and exhibitions, and all I see are just variations on about half a dozen strains. So when you follow all this lineage back, and when you see what's being grown in California and in the cannabis clubs in Spain, you've got your Girl Scout cookies, you've got your animal mints, you've got your grape ape, but then you've got your grape face, and then you've got your jealousy mints, and you've got your Kush purple granddaddy blue face. And it's all just variations on about 6 strains. It's
hype marketing, really, isn't it? It's going with, this is popular and this is popular. This would be super popular.
And then you've got ape gorilla, and then you've got gorilla ape, and there are only so many variations you can make out of these. What a quite small number of plants. And a lot of these plants are again, I'm not getting into the indica sativa, because you'll notice when I try and describe cannabis, I try and describe it in terms of its terpene profiles. Indicas tend to have the myrcene and linalols that make you sleepy. Sativas tend to have more limonene. But there are so many outliers that it almost makes it impossible to categorize. So, we're seeing very heavy, very high THC, myrcene heavy, couch locky. The sativas are actually very few and far between now. If you look, even in the medical space, you've got your ultra sour, your blue dream, and your lemon haze. That's about it.
In terms of what's actually lawfully being prescribed.
It's really hard to find those hazes now in the medical world.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in sort of the illicit space are still like, the people that find the benefit for them work with them. Obviously, as you were describing before, it's interesting that I try and avoid just generally saying sativa or indica unless I've already describing the taxonomy of the plant, just to try and avoid that confusion, because so many people do it black and white. And it's like, well, through hybridization and interbreeding of these plants, I mean, you can still get, as you said, the name of a blue cheese, for example, we'll take to on a Milo there. Whereas then you could get like a blueberry cheese that somebody else has reconstructed. They've crossed it to high, say a Thai 74 blueberry and an Exodus cheese or whatever, and then so there's their version. But the terpene profile of that will be slightly different. The expression of that will be slightly different. And it's the ratios of the percentage of the terpenes that tweaks it. So you could put 50-50 of 2 terps that are couch locky, and all of a sudden that's stimulating. Whereas then if you take one down by 2%, it then all of a sudden it's highly sedatory. There's so much nuance to all of this that.
Well, there is, and we're finding out it might, and you're right that it might not be the absolute amount as well. The ratios could all come into play, and what's become more prevalent over in my thinking is also, a lot of what we base cannabis on is based on the COA. So I see COAs for all of these strains that we are considering. And the COA gives you some information like, the amount of THC, the amount of CBD, the amount of THV, which is becoming more of interest. And it'll give you a breakdown of the terpenes. What it won't do is give you all of the information about the flavonoids. It won't give you information about all the elements, the amount of carbon and sulfur and nitrogen, the amount of compounds that aren't measured on the COA. And I think there's a couple of thousand compounds that are in a cannabis plant. Who knows whether the ratio of terpenes is only one small element of, well, how much carbon, how much of this, how much of that, how much flavonoids. Those are all the things we're finding out as well.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, a lot of the academic studies that I read and the academics that I speak with behind closed doors, that's kind of their focus at the minute, is understanding and modeling this idea of ratios.
Absolutely.
That if we can figure that one out and go, okay, if we at least see some form of pattern formation over metadata analysis, we can at least make a slightly better guess than we currently are. Because, I mean, other than, say, the Israelis that have gone very locked down on a lot of their research, they were looking at mapping human genome. So they were basically trying to figure out, okay, can we do some form of genetic test that gives us a profile that will say that actually you personally would be susceptible to let's call it an allergen-like reaction to these list of terpenes, whereas these ones would be very synergistic. So then from that, they can map and show you, okay, these cultivars to be avoided, these would then be beneficial. But as we said, there may be freaks within, obviously clones are quite locked in, you do get genetic drift and whatever, but that takes a long time and environmental factors, etc. But generally, if you're buying, say, a batch of whatever, insert cultivar here, and they're growing that from bag seed, like seeds rather than clone, those variants mean that there may be one or two that cause a similar like reaction. There's just so much to this that I think we almost need to map it the other way, which I think was an American group or somebody recently have basically said that they're looking at trying to figure out, and they've identified a common gene for all I hate the terminology of it, cannabis-induced psychosis and the human gene. So I think that if we can look at those kind of things, we've got a better idea of understanding why some people have that reaction. Once we can discount those extreme reactions, let's call them, again, allergic type reactions, it's the same as like if we were looking at nuts now and going, why the hell do nuts kill so many people? And if we remove this group of people, this
is a brilliant. I mean, this is a great conversation and a nighttime conversation, isn't it? Because I've read as well about the psychosis. If there could be a genetic disposition, some people are more vulnerable to it than others, and if you could find out early on who is susceptible, you could solve so many problems overnight. But then, of course, it throws up all these massive ethical questions, because if an insurance company or your employer could see that you are genetically disposed to, flaking off on a Friday, or you're going to die in 5 years, why am I going to employ someone who's going to die in 5 years? To give you an extreme example. But it throws up massive ethical questions, doesn't it? But it could solve so many problems at the same time. So
I think it's for me, it's the informed consent. I struggle with larger systems and with the construct of reality. As I've sort of said recently when I've spoke, I'm not so much a burn it all down, live in the ashes anarchist anymore. I'm more of a...
That's a shame. That's where I'm going.
Hey, I'm probably going to dip back in. At the minute,
come on, come back.
We need a few people, and there's a chance we can overthrow the system. I believe there should be some system, but that system should be... populated by individuals almost predisposed, if you want to continue this sort of point of to not wanting power. The most reluctant amongst us should lead us, and then there'd be criminal consequences that if you fuck up, and then you get put into this position and you figure it out. But it's basically the same with recommendations. You can go and get testing now through private healthcare or whatever, and go, okay, you are likely to develop diabetes if you continue eating like this or this. All of these genetic factors and lifestyle things. But these are only ever based on recommendations. And that's all it would be, is going, we recommend that you personally avoid this. And then what I think science should kind of work on is going, okay, the same way they do with EpiPens and peanut allergies. If you have a peanut allergy, carry an EpiPen in case you're exposed to peanuts. Would you
do it, though, if a doctor came along and said, go take a blood sample now and I'll tell you all the things you should avoid, but...
I mean, I personally
I might also find that you've got some genetic disorder that means you are going to die in 5 years. You could have a heart attack in 10. Would you like to know that, really?
These are options. So if you get tested for Huntington's disease or things like that are genetic predisposed conditions, you can choose to not get your results. You have the right to choose not to be informed with that. And again, I'm trying to really push this out. No, this is the point of this podcast. This is exactly what it is. This is exactly what it's about. So no, I agree. Like it should be a voluntary thing, and again, then society should be able to have that kind of conceptual idea.
Then what about the doctor? Right, the doctor's sitting there, and now doctors have this do no harm oath, don't they? And you're a doctor, and you're reading a line that says this person has got a deadly disease, and they're gonna fall over into. But they say they don't want to know that, but you know it. Then as a doctor, So are you not obliged to just say, oh, by the way, there's something you should know?
Patients,
just keep it quiet.
You kind of have to, though. It's patient's best wishes, in the same way of like a do not resuscitate order, things like this. we're moving into an area. I mean, look at what Canada's doing, Switzerland, other places with euthanasia. And I mean, that is something I agree with. We had Tom Curran on the podcast a couple of years ago. Legend of a man, love him and appreciate everything that's going on with that conversation. Obviously, there are some more fringe conspiracies going on with certain people thinking that Canada's trying to mass execute its population. But when you look at the size of Canada and it's got about 80 million people, what the fuck for? What? Why do they need to decrease the population? I think that's
they got enough space.
Yeah, but I think again that is you can be in, according to the Canadian rules, in good health, but choose to end your life. And I think again it's informed consent. We can jump out of a plane with a parachute and risk our life. If the parachute fails and you die, you signed a waiver. Nobody gets sued. The insurance is covered. You'll got maybe have life insurance and payout. Same like smoking, for example. I'm really nervous. I don't like tobacco. It's a dangerous drug, but what we're doing with it and potentially what the American insurance system is doing with making it an individual responsibility is like, no, you can't do that without then addressing sugar and meat and dairy and diet in general and lifestyle choices and living in a city. 40,000 people a year extra die in London from poison. From major cities, from air pollution in this country, including London. I think it's actually the peak of it is obviously around London, Birmingham, and whatever the other one was. I can't read in my head. But that's, you can argue that's then the choice. So I don't agree with any of that shit. I think the function of government, the function of society and the system is to ring fence human behavior and protect us. In the same way we go, all right, you can buy a fucking car that drives 200 miles an hour, but you're only allowed to do 70 on the motorway. How many people drive those cars at 160, 180, whatever? So what do? We make the car safer. We try and make the roads safer. Yeah, you put up speed cameras and you go, oh, you shouldn't do that. And they go, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And then they go and do it.
I guess I've got a couple of points on that is first, it's the bad actors, isn't it? I mean, it's great to say it's consent and it should be private, but we all know that it's very difficult nowadays to keep things private. Leaks and data do have a habit of escaping. But the second point, I suppose, is whatever our thoughts are, it's going to happen anyway. This technology, as we've seen with all the debates about AI, should we or shouldn't we? Well, guess what? It's going to happen.
We definitely
and all this genetics and modifications, it's happening, whether you like it or not.
Well, yeah, look at what happened as a consequence of Dolly the sheep and the cloning conventions. It's been reported several times over the past 5 years that I've seen that China are openly flouting this with creating chimeric genomes using animal-human hybrids and all sorts of shit. This isn't even sci-fi. I'll make sure I make a note of this to include this chimeras. In the thing below, guys, because there's all kinds of shit. So people can break the rules. A rule is just a rule. It's not like it's Homer and Lisa in the car when he goes to try and start his car because he hasn't got his driver's license. It doesn't physically stop him.
And even we can make these rules, but who knows whether that rule is impeding an incredible scientific breakthrough. Who knows what could come out of this? There could be a cure for all sorts of diseases. And we say, well, it's not ethical. We don't want it to happen. Well, then you're condemning people to suffer from horrible disease. It's all well saying it's unethical. But if my daughter suffered from DEBRA, and it stands for, it's where your skin blisters when you touch it. It's a horrible disease. If you could eradicate that overnight, there isn't a person on this planet that would disagree that should be eradicated. But it's a genetic disease. It has to start with genetic experiments.
It's as we were talking about before about the ethics of this get very messy in terms of it can't exist in a vacuum. In an ideal system where everything isn't predicated on scarcity or artificial scarcity and screwing each other over for capital. All of this technology, wonderful, liberating, Star Trek future, beyond. We can go take on the galaxy and explore the universe, But under the current guise of it, I mean, there was a panel convened the other day with like the founder of ChatGPT, Google's DeepMind creator, and all these people, and they were like,
"Where are you resigning?"
They were like, "What the fuck? What have we done?" Like they were like, the idea, it was what's his name, Jeff Goldblum in fucking Jurassic Park, and they sat at the dinner table and the scientists, and you're doing before you even questioned whether you should or the implications of what this means. I think a lot of them have gone, well, we were thinking we were creating this stuff for the betterment of mankind, as most of these individuals do, I think.
Yeah, right.
They are curious individuals with intellect, that have a high education, and they go and try and problem solve. They don't think what the paymasters are going to do when they've solved that problem. Think Oppenheimer and the fucking atomic bomb. You know what I mean? It's...
Yeah, well, I think, so going back to the cannabis debate, I think, well, no,
we're talking about cannabis.
I think we're looking. I saw a very similar debate about Germany, about whether the commercial model or the cannabis club model. Because the cannabis club model is obviously there to try and nurture a local market, keep out the big international investors, and I love the clubs in Spain. When I went to Spannabis, when I saw you there, I thought the clubs were great. But if you said to me, if you want to drink alcohol, you can only go to a microbrewery and you can only drink what the microbrewery makes, and there can only be 500 members, because I think the clubs in Malta, there's a limit of 500.
Same in
and
Germany.
If you don't like the microbrewery, or you don't like the person who runs it, or you want to have wine instead of beer, there are a lot of downsides, I think, to that club model. And I know we've had this debate when we're in Spannabis about the corporates. I work for corporate, albeit a small one, who's trying to be a large one. I do think competition and companies can bring something in terms of innovation and new products and giving people what they want. I do, and although I love the cannabis clubs, I do worry that the cannabis clubs can maybe a little bit too restrictive. There we go. I've just thrown in another debate for you.
I agree, and the more we do this, obviously with us having limited time here, I think I'm gonna have to invite you back.
We've only just got started.
We'll do part two another time. We'll keep going with this, but yeah, I think the clubs. I agree that Spain is starting to evolve slowly. They're going to plug in their medicinal system, and that I had a real interesting conversation with someone at a consulate trying to figure out my rights when I was flying over there with my prescription. So yeah, they're going to iron all of that shit out, and eventually they'll have that wider conversation. Yeah. But they're starting to explore certain different evolutions of the clubs. They're trying to then close down certain aspects they don't like. I think Germany, unfortunately, going the opposite of Malta and others. They've just announced that they're not consumption clubs. You cannot consume cannabis on site or within 250 meters of a club.
What? What is it?
It's a cultivation club. So you can only, if you grow at home in Germany, you're limited to, I think it's three plants per year per household. And you have to buy those plants registered and traced from the cannabis associations. And they can sell you clones, but then the government has a record of all the genetics that are sold. Like I said, and you can buy up to 50 grams a month, capped at, I'm trying to read it in my brain. It's on my blog from last week or the week before, about 400 grams, whatever. Somebody do the math, 50 grams times whatever weeks, whatever months, 600, 500.
Really frustrating, isn't it?
But what they've done is, looking at the rules, they say no consumption of cannabis in public pathways between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. So I don't know if they're then saying you can smoke cannabis on the street from 8 p.m. at night till 7 in the morning. I'm not...
You can still do your early wake and bake then.
Yeah, if you were up in the... So it's the rules. Like, the more of it that keeps coming out, the problem is that a lot of the cannabis press around the world is owned and operated by a small group of individuals, some of which I'm not going to name, and they just regurgitate these corporate lines that people go, oh, cool, I'll move my money to Germany now. And all they're doing is just bringing that same group of Canadians, Americans, more growing Australians and Israelis and Colombians, Zimbabweans. There are some big countries that are becoming players, not because they are national players, but because a company has got into that country, infiltrated that system and painted it as, we're going to help this place. Think, is it Lathos? the kingdom in this landlocked in South Africa. They got absolutely screwed over by their system, and they were promised domestic licensing and all this other stuff. And it seems it's the same things. And so wherever these models pop up, it's running through that mill. And I think the big grinder that's crushing all of these plans in Europe at the minute is the EU, because we spoke about on this podcast for a while now, the European Union are working on a state model. So that would be for the entirety of the European trading bloc. So that would be fucking huge. That would dwarf the North American market. So when Mexico finally comes on board, that's like 125 million. Plus Canada, that's 83, let's call it, million. USA, the 330 odd million. You know, that block of Europe is about 700 million people.
Yeah. And when you think how many smokers there are in that.
No hard borders. Yeah. That's the problem of this. Like I said, you can't air quotes legalize or air quotes decriminalize in a vacuum. And this is
I spoke to guys in when I was at MJ Biz, you know, because it surprised me in the US, and I found out to my cost that you can't travel across state lines, even though Nevada and California, it's both legal. It's legal in both states. You cannot take product from one state to the other. Needless to say, Americans who live near one of the state border whose state is not legal, they just drive over. And it's an open secret. You just drive over to the state where it's legal, you buy what you want, you drive back home. Well, guess what? It's going to happen in Germany. It's going to happen, I was going to say from Malta, but it might be a bit harder to get over there by geography. But yes, Switzerland. Switzerland are doing legal. But here's the thing, you know, I know that the guys in Germany, if they could click the fingers and say, we're going to have a rec market tomorrow, they would do it. What they're coming up against is that huge inertia, opposition, and they're trying to find that compromise where they can at least get it over the line to say, right, Germans can now buy cannabis in this building legally. But because it's going to be not perfect, they're not going to drive the black market away. You're not going to really change it.
I think
it's the step. It's the step. And it's like, go for it.
Yeah. The risk amplifying, I'd say, the market by if they then create far more cannabis consumers, but they can't access it because they're only allowed to go 3 plants a year at home. It becomes problematic. I mean, I think
how are you going to police that as well? No one can police that.
Exactly. So it's the same with Thailand, like we were saying before. Of you have to restrict the business end of it. You have to liberate the people, and then allow them a few years of I'm going to grow 1,000 plants. I'm going to do whatever. We need the adjustment. We need the adjustment. But then ring fence it. Let them come out and and exist and see who we are. Let us live in the light for a bit. Then work on regulations in partnership with the actual culture, consumers, and community, and then it'll be meaningful. Because if you actually got air quotes legalization right, guess what? There wouldn't be a black market by default because none of the market would be painted black by the system. That's the main issue here. And I think Germany's got a lot of subtle pressure because it's Europe's largest medicinal market. Hundreds of thousands of patients. You know what I mean? And they're scared that it's going to follow Canada's model. And Canada, as soon as they went national air quotes legalized, their medicinal sector got harmed, not because of the consumers or even the outlets, the dispensaries, etc., but because the big boys went, why the hell are we growing this little amount that runs through all this red tape and only makes this and goes there when we can open up all of our facilities and grow all of this much? And obviously the big boys in Canada, let's call them 7, although they've all been cannibalized by Tilray at this point, so there's very few of them left. They've just eaten Hexo or are in the process of eating them, I believe. Sorry about that, folks. Had a bit of a disruption there. Let's get back to it. So yeah, I think I was talking about what I was perceiving as a fear of the medicinal sector in sort of Germany and Europe being Europe's largest sort of market currently, that if they follow this Canadian kind of model where, you know, unbridled air quotes legalization happens in Germany, that it would dramatically affect the medicinal sector. And then I think I was mentioning something about like the big boys.
Here's
a hot potato. Go.
Well, yeah, I mean, the point I was going to make, I think when I visited San Francisco, and I interviewed a number of dispensary owners, so I actually emailed them before I went and asked them if they'd be up for interviews, and I interviewed 4 dispensary owners over there, so it gave me an insight into first of all what a struggle it is for all of them, and that has really been repeated in all the cannabis online newspapers information sources that say how difficult it is for companies in California and Canada. And I think this is the point I was going to make about the medicinal. They have seen a reduction in the medicinal side or the medical side. The medical clinics there don't get as many patients because the patients go to the dispensaries and they buy what they want to buy. And I suppose the point is, I mentioned corporates and big corporates and takeovers, etc. And they've got the best craft growers in the world in California. I mean, or some of them, and those small craft growers who are based in Humboldt and Mendocino, Fort Bragg, and they make extraordinary, really high quality products. But the majority of people, when they walk into those dispensaries, what do they buy? They buy, through their own choice, the highest THC for the lowest price. Mm. And that was repeated by every dispensary owner and the farmers that I met up in Humboldt and the smoking lounges in Eureka. Mm-hmm. And they said, we wish it wasn't that way. We wish that everyone would consume all this lovingly crafted cannabis, but they prefer the high THC, lowest price. Mm. When I don't know if you've seen The Business of Drugs on Netflix. It's a documentary with a woman who says she was in the CIA for years, and then she focuses on one drug, heroin and opiate and whatever. And cannabis was one of the episodes. And she went down to Southern California, and the reason I mention that is Northern California tends to be the craft producers because it's centered still around Humboldt and the forests, the redwood forest around there that provided good cover. But all of the big brands, the big Californian brands, are based in Southern California. And I was told that that's because they do the indoor grows there. Most of the grows in Humboldt are still outdoor grow. And in Southern California, they were given big subsidies in order to build these big facilities, and they undercut all of the craft producers. And we're all familiar with this, right? In all walks of life, this is the way it goes. And so you immediately go, the corporates, bloody corporate. But the reason I bring up this documentary is this woman visited these facilities in Southern California. And it transpired that it's in a couple of towns just outside Los Angeles, where, for whatever reason, the industry moved out of these towns. And we all know America, it's a land of contradictions, right? The richest and the poorest living next door to each other. And this town became a ghost town. All these big factories were just left dormant. Mm-hmm. And the town itself came together and said, what are we going to do with these huge buildings? And they decided for themselves to convert them into indoor cannabis grows. And so it suddenly went from being, the corporates, to see actually this is a community in Southern California who decided the way they were going to resurrect their town and rejuvenate their town was to turn these old decaying factories into big indoor cannabis grows. And suddenly, okay, well, they're not the big face of corporate America. They're actually a small town who are trying to help themselves. And so it's full of those contradictions. And those big indoor grows produce all these the high THC strains that we all recognize, but they produce them at scale, and the craft producers can't compete with the big producers. So yeah, no, there's no right or wrong. It's an observation, and the point with medical is, you know, I think what's happening in Europe is that they've looked at California, they've looked at Canada, and said, well, look, that model is not working. You know, everyone's complaining, no one's making money. We don't want to do it like that. And so we're going down the cannabis club route, which as we just mentioned, I don't think is ideal either. Wouldn't it be a beautiful world if we could arrive at some happy medium where everyone was, yeah, that's not going to happen, is it? So
we need to look at the closest comparison, and the closest thing that we can look at is, what was it? The 19th Amendment, 18th and 19th, that prohibited alcohol and then repealed it in the US. So that's quite recent. We can see the consequences of what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
So beer fell off a cliff quite quickly. So the reason that we have such high THC and a demand for such high THC is a consequence of the criminality of smuggling and supply. So a lot of your heirloom, which is what I was trying to think of before, Lumiere. I was stuck with it. I was trying to say Lumiere because we have a light festival called Lumiere, and it's bloody heirlooms, which are land races that have been moved to an area and then adapted through periods of times and generational iterations to be an heirloom to that area. It doesn't necessarily mean it's indigenous, because actually you trace all cannabis back to like the Tibetan plateau. But I digress. My point is that for smuggling, then you wouldn't take these heirlooms that are 5% this, 2% this, when people were able to concentrate higher amounts of it, especially when they were making hashish and things like this. So you would want, especially now with BHO concentrates and things like that. So people are wanting the higher plants. So it's scale of economics, as you say. It's capitalism 101. So they're trying to make the most money for the least amount of input, and then to be able to transport it rather than giant ass bundles, which only accumulate to X amount of THC. Which actually, interestingly, Germany until previous, they would criminalize you based on cumulative THC or cumulative compounds, not the weight of the whole product.
Yeah.
But again,
I agree with that, but I also think there's human psychology, right? And human psychology is
bang for your buck.
But a lot, So yeah,
well, that's where the alcohol thing comes in. So again, during prohibition of alcohol, sorry, it's a bit disjointed thoughts. It will all come together to a nice crescendo here, folks. I swear.
We hope.
We lost, we hope. We ended up with things like your much stronger alcohol. So rather than your beers and whatever, and even sort of wines, your connoisseur drinks that people enjoyed for flavor or their unique effect, etc. It became about the highest intoxicants. So your whiskeys, your vodkas, your higher end spirits took over with your moonshine and etc. Because it was just about that scale of economics. Then as they came out of prohibition, it took a while for it to bounce back again, because they were still trying to tax and regulate on percentages of alcohol rather than just understanding it as, well, actually what we're ever going to do is, if we put an arbitrary level, is we encourage people to stay just under or over that level depending on their class position and the amount of money that they have to spend. So once they kind of leveled the playing field, people could choose to consume 2 or 3 whiskeys over an evening, or somebody could choose to have their 10 beers or whatever the correlatory thing is there. And they allowed that to occur not just in the consumption spaces, but in your own home. Then on special occasions in public spaces, they really tried to go, well, where do humans consume alcohol? Then we regulate for that. We need that similar approach with cannabis. And you can't, wherever you're going to put it, as we said before, you will create a grey and an unregulated, unlawful market if the lawful market isn't around where human behavior is. So as you said before, like, people want to sit in the park and have a few ciders and a couple of smokes. In Durham, we have a beautiful riverbank that curves around the city that every warm day, for all we only get a few, which is why I'm always bloody complaining about the weather on this podcast, people sit and enjoy alcohol. Technically the rules say that we can't, but the police have a discretion to it of knowing that they're going to have a few drinks. Most people clean up after themselves. A nice day is had. It stimulates the economy. People are happy, joyous. So we want the same sort of thing. It's not about unbridled, unregulated, uncontrolled, because none of us want that. There is going to be a period of that bounce back, that adjustment, like I said, where if you suddenly allow a caged animal out, guess what? It's going to be a long time before it wants to step back inside again. because it's yearned for that freedom forever. So it's going to have to find its own limits. And as a society and a culture, we're going to have to go, oh, you're allowed to do that. In the same way you see a 19-year-old whiteying or whatever, the being sick, is a non-northern term, from alcohol consumption. Most of us go, oh, young, you'll get used to it, can't handle your drink.
Yeah, it's a rite of passage.
Exactly. And it's you're not going to demonize or vilify that kid. Yeah, they've made a mess or whatever, but all the bars have like sawdust or buckets to prepare for that. You know, the security in the pubs, there's then policing, you have the CCTV infrastructure, you have the food, late night food and taxis and all this other infrastructure associated to reduce the harm of a behavior that's going to happen anyway. Imagine the anarchy that it would be if they pulled away all of that support and left alcohol consumption the way they have. And it kind of is in some areas.
Well, I think you can draw more analogies with alcohol. The primary one being that alcohol is often cited by the advocates of cannabis clubs, and the arguments against corporates is, look what's happened at the alcohol industry. You know, you've got several companies who dominate pubs, and if you go into a pub, you see the same spirits behind the bar. You know, it's usually the same beers on tap, because the corporates dominate the pubs. But actually, when you look slightly closer, we all know what's happened in the last few years. Craft beers and independents. Look in the world of gin. Yeah, gin exploded. Craft beers have exploded. We've got more choice now than we've ever had. Okay, you can't go into a pub and see all that choice, but it's there. And I think that's the way the cannabis market will evolve as well. But if we put everything into cannabis clubs, it won't happen. Because you won't have that innovation.
Well, that's the free market thing with the alcohol. So again, it's now you can be any event and apply for a temporary alcohol license. You can host a private event on private land and people can consume alcohol. You know, the regulations of sale and supply of that, it doesn't need to be all the bureaucracy and red tape that is around what they're trying to do to strangle out cannabis. I agree that there will be this, the parent companies, and not even the parent companies, your BlackRocks, your Vanguards, etc. Those investment firms are going to own the majority stakes of everything anyway, and monopolize and control that end of the market. But I agree, the way to get the craft into it is through a standardization of taxation on the product for what the product is, not who supplies the product.
Level the playing field.
Yeah, and actually not just equality, but in a lot of ways equity, and providing incentives and tax breaks to allow others to compete. Because we've already seen, look, the UK is still saying, oh, well, we have no intentions of rescheduling or changing the law around cannabis. Yet you look at the Tory MPs and how many of them are invested in this, and what those firms are speculating to be able to do over the next 5 to 10 years. They're going to get such a head start on the craft growers, the Humboldt growers of the UK, that a lot of these guys that I know, they're in Thailand, they're in Spain, they're gone, they're elsewhere. They're looking around the world going, this country is a sinking ship. Yeah, they are not nationalist as in, you know, crazy with the flag, but I mean, they love the place that they've been brought up. They love the people. They love the culture. They want to see this island succeed. And in a post-EU reality, we need to really look at this. So I think Little Britain needs to look at what's happening around the world and kind of go, shit, we need to get ahead of this. We've got huge amounts of land. We've got an incredible amount of labor force. We have already a large population of consuming cannabis. Let's just tax all of it, not just ring fence and allow a couple of clubs, couple of dispensaries, couple of cafe pubs, whatever. Open the fucking floodgates, because already right now the taxation, put an extra tax on the hydro industry, not on the consumer, but on, say, the industry, and then use that to offset. Take the billions you're going to save in policing and use that. Save the billions you'll save from health services. There's so much money could be put into a new system that I think we need to be bold. I think the British needs to lead the fucking way. We did with drug policy for decades until we finally kowtowed down to the the United Nations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I obviously applaud the sentiment. I would love to see it. The cynical side of me is the UK probably won't, but that
you call it cynical, I call it realist. They're not going to do it. Currently, our politics is not anywhere where it needs to be.
Well, just again, a very slight digression. When I went to Las Vegas, and you saw the US industry, because that is the showcase for the US industry. It's the biggest conference. And what struck me was all of the IP, the knowledge, the experience, the know-how, all the machinery that is designed that you need to produce products at scale. These are big machines that take in kilograms of cannabis flower and either turn it into an oil or a gummy or a rosin. They cost a lot of money, and they have to be designed. And when they get designed, things go wrong, and then someone comes along and designs a better one, and then someone else designs a better version, and so on and so on. All that IP right now resides in the US. All of that design, all that know-how, all that experience, it all resides in the US and Canada because they've got the legal market. And so when Europe does become recreational, it's just another US. They dominate in so many areas. This is another one. It's going to be very hard for any country to catch up in terms of the machinery and the processing. And that is a really important part of business, right? It's no getting away from it.
It's an interesting one because obviously we then think of China doesn't really acknowledge, especially historically, US patents, but nobody's patents. So they'll be able to copy that machinery, make it far cheaper, and it will be available to other nation states.
It's sort of interesting. The point as well is all of this gets made in China, but it's all designed and owned in the States.
See, I don't think that the CCP is stupid. I don't. I think maybe they're very misguided in some ways, and their form of kind of a bastardized capitalist socialism is terrifying to me. If you look at sort of credit scores and the concentration of CCTV cameras and AI and all of that stuff, really is a bit next level. We've got
that's another podcast, right?
New Black Mirror's out in a couple of weeks. I'm really hoping they're going to have an episode that kind of covers this shit. But yeah, so I think when they start to move, as you said, that the Asian plateau, that whole region from the Middle East out, including Australia, New Zealand, as an economic trade group, is going to be fucking enormous. China already holds patents for graphene and cannabis future technologies, including batteries. You know what I mean? It's these guys are ahead of this. They're already looking at quantum computing, and they sent and activated a chip from a satellite with no electricity connected to no network. These guys are working on entanglement to move energy and data and shit. It's like, do you know what I mean? So
it's far ahead.
So once they get it past this whole, we don't like the weed, and Singapore and those other regions, because eventually they will. It'll take a long time. But I think that if it comes down to it, the next Cold War is effectively over cannabis. It's that resource. And I think that some places are going to have to open the patents to this to basically go, well, how do we make this better? And on scale, I think the scale producers of cannabis should be producing it for everything other than a drug effectively at this point. Like all of the myriad of other byproducts, it should be creating bioethanols to replace petroleums, plastic alternatives, as we said.
Can do,
batteries. Using it for desalinization because cannabis, graphene, running salt water, or if it generates electricity. So we can create energy efficient desalinization and tackle the water wars, which are prophesized to be the next big resource issue we're going to have post oil.
Here's a challenge. I spoke to a British hemp farmer 3 or 4 months ago, and hempcrete. So hempcrete as a product is like concrete. It's like a breeze block.
Oh, yeah, there's a block of it there.
They're brilliant. So, and it's great, right? It's fantastic for carbon capture. So it captures all the carbon. We could make all our houses and buildings out of these hempcrete blocks. Wouldn't it be wonderful? And I spoke to the UK farmer, and he said, we've investigated how we can do it in the UK, and it's just too expensive. We just cannot produce it at a commercial level. So all our focus now is on Africa, where the countries in Africa are looking at hemp as being the solution to low cost housing, which obviously is important in a developing nation. And you just said, what has the world come to where growing our bricks is too expensive? It's just mind-blowing that we're in a situation where we can't grow our own fruits.
It's the artificial scarcity. It's the power. This is what I've argued with many people before, and a lot of people don't like this. But ultimately, we need to crash the cannabis drug industry to have ubiquitous cannabis plants. We need to rewild the world with trillions of cannabis plants. You want to say literally in one fucking year, we'd sequester all of that carbon. Done. No carbon tax, none of this bullshit, none of any of this stuff. All of that mass resource you can then create into all of these create all of those industries, and just fucking, if we want to smoke it, we fucking smoke it and leave that alone. Let the craft and all that stuff. But the big boys need to be really looking at this. I mean, look at what's happened with the levels of deforestation in Brazil for fucking foreign meat supply. You know, it's insanity. You could get a pear from a fucking supermarket in Britain, and it'll say, "Oh, grown in Peru, packaged in Australia, fucking verified in this country." It's like, that is cheaper than growing the pear over here because of these artificial mechanisms within neoliberalistic capitalism. It's a true revolution. It's a terrifying thing, because it means you're going to crash the oil market. You're going to crash plastic futures. You're going to crash a lot of the existing infrastructure. But unless we decouple ourselves from it, I mean, these guys screaming, "Just stop oil." They're right, but they're wrong. There needs to be these viable alternatives. I've beaten my face bloody with activists and advocates from Extinction Rebellion about cannabis. They don't want to hear it. These people, they can't. Cannabis is a drug and it's dirty and it does this, and they can't get it. There needs to be a government.
I mean, I went to some Just Stop Oil meeting. I was really interested in. You know, and the people I met, they weren't rich middle-class kids. They were housewives, they were middle-aged, they were gardeners, and what they had in common is they were terrified. I mean, terrified. And that's something that it seems to be glossed over with these Just Stop Oil, that the people who are doing this are not driven from, you know, some rich middle-class ideology. These are people who can't sleep at night because they're terrified of what the future holds, and the level of violence and hatred that they are encountering is I think sends a message that as me and you can talk about this all day, and we can come up with solutions, but when you see people who are petrified about the future being thrown and tossed in the road and vilified, we're a long way from the solutions that you've just outlined.
And I can empathize and understand that fear and that want for action. I really can, and I truly can. But I can sympathize and empathize with those drivers and the frustrations and I agree with the public disruption of events. I think that's fair. You want to do the Crucible and the fucking rugby and Chelsea Flower Show and all that shit, kind of all for it. You know what I mean? They're quite elitist sort of events, as it were. Disrupt that shit. Remind these people. They need to feel some of your guilt, some of your fear and your anxiety of the future. But when you're disrupting individuals that are already on the verge of mass murder, effectively, which frankly millions of us are, we're all capable of extreme violence, and most of us are being driven to it through the cost of living crisis, through the collapse of any hope, of any potential prosperity in our future. And then they see these individuals acting upon something that is so abstract to them that they become that token. And then when the establishment, the mainstream press and the government effectively allows for this vilification, legislates for it, promotes it, then you can see why they become the next scapegoated group, in the same way the immigrants currently are, in the same way that people on fucking benefits have always been scroungers. And it's these obfuscations of these conversations that could be so vital. And frankly, to me, it is insane, because again, we talk of all of these companies growing all this cannabis drug. None of them are using the cannabis plant biomass for those other materials. We need vertically integrated industries, not because then it's for the betterment of a current corporation and their future profits and shareholders, but so that no part of the plant goes to waste, because it is such a multi-versatile resource that frankly, if I grow 20, 30 plants at my house, I should be able to give that material, once I've taken the buds, to somebody, and that become clothing, that become insulation, that become plastics, you know, so something of meaning and value. And I feel that it's these logistical issues, because we're trying to constrain cannabis when I feel that the vast majority of all of the ills of the world right now are caused by nearly 70 years of its prohibition internationally.
Mm.
The CO2 going up, the acidification of the fucking waterways, you know, the plastics in our fucking blood with microplastics, you know, the endocrine disrupting chemicals in our bodies, you know, birth rates dropping, fertility rates dropping, socioeconomic collapse, environmental desertification, deforestation, etc. It's all in my head so clearly linked to the global eradication of hundreds of millions, if not billions, of plants a year.
Yeah, well, I can certainly. I mean, it's certainly a symptom, and you can look at cannabis as being a case study, if you like, for a multitude of things that need fixing. Obviously, cannabis is what we're focused on, so that's the area that we feel can be improved for the betterment of everybody. I guess you mentioned Australia, so I should perhaps.
I do have a few questions about Australia. So yeah, we probably should get on to Australia.
We've spent the warm up has been an hour and a half. So
all right, there we go. All right, folks. Preamble. Now we'll start the podcast. I suppose then actually, yeah, you're right. Let's talk about Australia because there's quite a few things that Releaf are involved in down there. But I suppose first of all, for anybody that doesn't really know, I do actually have a small percentage of listeners. I think it's 1.something% of Australian listeners. But anybody that doesn't know the other 90-odd%, could you give us an overview of kind of how it works? Because there's 4 different regions in Australia.
Well, now you've put me on the spot. It's states, isn't it? It's states. And I think there's 7 or 8, if you count the Tasmania and the government territory, because they all count as separate territories. And it's very much like the USA, you know, that each state votes for their own state government, and that government have certain powers. So the cannabis laws are different in Victoria than they are in New South Wales. Ironically, in one of those ironies, the government territory is the only territory where you can grow your own. So the politicians are fine. Everyone else, it's illegal. But yeah, there's different laws in different states. But the federal law is obviously there as well. So you have to be aware of both. I'd sum it up as it's really contradictions, because it's both it's got a great model and a terrible one, and they sort of sit side by side. So I can go through each. The great model is the medical cannabis, that I think is one of the best in the world, in that the gatekeepers are doctors, you know, and that's the way it should be in medical cannabis, in my view. And so you don't have this crazy situation where people who want medical cannabis in the UK have to show that it's the medicine of last resort, and they have to have tried two different types of medicine in order to get a prescription over in the UK. Another digression. I spoke to a doctor the other day about endometriosis. Obviously, a lot of female women suffer from this, an extraordinary number, actually. The more I talk to, it seems that most women have got some experience of it. And a lot of women use cannabis as part of the monthly cycle, right? Because it helps ease the pain.
Wait, Victoria
did. If you go to a doctor, but there's no cure for it. Doctor, no one understands what causes it or how to cure it.
It's kind of like irritable bowel syndrome in that same way.
Yeah,
it seems to be a catch-all for a series of things that they just can't get their head around.
Yeah. I mean, it's a terrible thing to have as well, because it can put you out of action for 5 or 6 days. But if you go to a doctor, because of this, you have to have tried 2 medicines before you can try cannabis. If you go to a doctor with endometriosis and say, well, all my women friends are all smoking cannabis, you know, as part of the monthly cycle to help alleviate the pain, the doctor can't prescribe cannabis because they can't show 2 drugs, because there's no drugs out there that cure it. So you can't prescribe cannabis for endometriosis. So you have to say it's chronic pain. You can't actually say. So that's the crazy world in the UK. The Australia, by contrast, the doctor has the authority and the responsibility to assess the patient need, and if they think that the patient will benefit, then they can prescribe pretty much anything. And I say, flower, hash, resin. So they've got the freedom to prescribe. And the quality of the product is good. It's easy to. There's none of these laws about you can't store it on site. You don't have to have a doctor say the 3 months anticipated use. All the bullshit
bureaucracy is
you don't have it in Australia.
Is it a radiated supply?
Well, it's the contaminants. It's got a fairly high bar, same as the UK. So a lot of outdoor grown just can't get under the limits, so it gets irradiated. So again, you're in with that. The powers that be have put this bar, very high bar, or low bar if it's low contaminants. That means it has to be irradiated to get in to comply. Wouldn't be our choice. I think irradiated is important for those patients who have immune problems. There is definitely a case for irradiated product, but not for everyone. It's not necessary for everyone. It's a specialist product. Don't digress. So Australia's got this great medical market. It allows a lot of freedom. There's 300,000 patients as opposed to 25,000 in the UK, despite the population being half the size. And it's growing almost month on month, as people get to know about the benefits.
Does it allow combustion?
Yes, in that 80% of our product is flower. So
it's not like the UK where they, air quotes, recommend.
Yeah.
I have been back and forth with many of these people about what recommend means, and I cannot get a legalese definition of this to qualify and to quantify exactly what the fuck it means and what the punishment would be. But I have spoken to, again, I'm not going to name you, but I've spoken to somebody very high up, formerly high up in one of these areas that knows exactly that this is happening and are advising their clinicians not to do anything. So it's deeply frustrating to a man of, I was going to say sort of moral high standing, but I don't know if I have a moral high standing, but I do know that I want to not lie. So to have that, I think that's something that I would advocate for in the UK. I think that's the reason we're not getting over that mark.
No, it obviously, doctors don't want to prescribe smoking. I get it, and we get approached with pre-rolls. So pre-rolls really popular in the rec markets. I had them in the California. I think they're strong because they pack them now. It's not just the flower, is it? They then put a line of resin and the keef and then roll it all together. It is mind-blowing. But lots of companies have said, can we supply pre-rolls? It's like that is a little bit too close to the edge. I can't imagine a doctor prescribing.
I agree. I think I think creating the discretion, that's enough. So I think this is what it should be in the UK, is the doctor recommends vaporization, but if I choose to ignore that recommendation and combust a pure blunt, then I should be protected and not face any consequence. In the same way, if I am morbidly obese and go to a doctor, and we're not really using that language these days, they can recommend and suggest that even the consequence of inaction, and I can still listen to them and go, oh yeah, I will join the gym, sure, and then walk out there going, yeah, fuck you, and walk into McDonald's. There was no consequence. It's informed consent. I have made that decision, and so I think I agree. I think that is a far better system, because then I'll vape to the point where I'll get a headache before I'll get any relief, whereas I can take 3 off a blunt, and even the action of taking the time sitting and knocking it up. By the time I've literally lit and got the first few, I'm calmer. My brain it's not as noisy, not as hard as a place to be, and I then just put it down and then be like, okay. Whereas then if I've got to fuck around and try and get a vape and then try and actually, I'm
The vape
almost
definitely
hurt.
has a
I'm not.
place.
It's
I mean, it
entirely.
definitely
I'm
has
not. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm advocating again for that full spectrum
Yeah.
of consumption. I think that that's what it has to be. As what I was saying before about drawing the lines around humanity. This is why I think we need an observational window under decriminalization. My ideal would be, let's pick 5 fucking counties in the UK and let's do a 1-year observational study with the police discretion, completely decriminalize cannabis in those regions, observe the behaviors that happen, criminalize things like people stealing the electric for growing and other shit like that, but not the cannabis they're producing, get rid of that criminality, encourage, we're not necessarily fully encourage, but, you know, allow the people that are doing it correctly to do it, and then write legislation to secure the people that have done it in a way that is amicable and fits in with society.
Yeah, it sort of solve the problems, not anticipated problems. I mean, yeah, and businesses do that all the time. You know, you end up having meetings upon meetings, anticipating what problems there are rather than tackle them when they come along. But yeah, absolutely. And so I guess the terrible part of the market is just this anomaly that CBD is banned. It's prescription only in Australia, which is extremely strange. Given that
is there a loophole for your hemp derived or anything like that, or is it literally like
there's
there
hemp
is no
oil, but CBD itself, you know, when you think that the efficacy now is fairly well understood, and to my knowledge, there's no major health side effects.
I think the only issue that some people are struggling with, but it's been made really difficult to understand by a lot of people because of the language that is used by the people investigating it. So they're saying cannabinoids and contraindications with pharmaceutical drugs. When actually, if you look into the literature, CBD seems to inhibit the enzyme in the liver, cytochrome P450, which is responsible for breaking down most modern pharmaceutical drugs. So it can cause a compounding effect. So you can end up accidentally overdosing on these things if you're taking a large amount of CBD alongside of it. So there is a potential. There is something as well to do with glaucoma. It can worsen something around glaucoma. I remember reading that a couple of years ago. I need to dip my toe back into that water. But yeah, generally speaking, it's a lot safer than our food. You know, it's.
I mean, it's an essential oil. It's like saying, you know, essential coriander oil or essential, you know, lavender oil should be banned or prescription only, in my mind. So you've got that. You know, it's a shame that we can't sell CBD direct that like we can over here. And the other one is vaping, you know, which is a big contentious issue in Australia, but nicotine vapes are banned. You can get them on prescription. So this whole argument about, well, we don't know how safe vapes are, but the one thing we are all agreed on is it's safer than smoking.
So yeah, they've got to make it.
And so in Australia, you've got this. It's just they don't hear it. They're just like, no, vapes are banned. You know, you've got to stick with your cigarettes or give them up. That's it.
Well, it is interesting. So I think what they're trying to do is basically, go. Look, New Zealand, you're the nearest neighbours in Australia. Obviously, they've basically introduced a thing that anyone born after 2016, whatever date it was, they're going to try and basically go that under this age you're not allowed it. And I think what they're trying to do, with the same as most of the places around the world, is not create any new tobacco smokers. But that's then twinned with the liberal argument of, well, free market economics and their right to choose to do that. If you're saying that them doing that has a higher statistical probability of them killing themselves, harming themselves, and costing society, we have to have that conversation about everything else. So we're kind of stuck. That's the entryway to this point of our entire lives being governed, where our caloric intake will be registered, and body fat and BMI and everything will be used to calculate, you know, how far you're allowed to walk today. And I think so that I'm fighting for those tobacco people. I'm in a paradox of it. I've struggled on and off with tobacco addiction over my life, but I'm still like, you have to be able to do it. It's education. Taxation hasn't worked. Australia brought in the crazy packaging, and they kickstarted that around the UK, but they also took on a hell of a lot of lawsuits from Philip Morris and British American Tobacco, two of the largest players in the world, tobacco producers, um, because of these things, and they actually won it. There's some in Australian courts where some big corporations can win, and because it's a westernized country, that kind of holds enough precedent that they can then push back against legislators in other regions. And I think tobacco, a lot of the tobacco money has gone into vaporization. If you look at British American Tobacco, or BAT as the trade as, BAT's futures are something like 40-odd% non-combustible nicotine and non-nicotine products. They're moving into cannabis and they're moving into vapes. They don't want vapes to be a medical device that stops you smoking and then you quit the vape. They want you to get off the tobacco and onto the vape for the rest of your life. So I can see why there's these issues around these sort of things. And if you look in the UK, there's now kids around here that I'm smashing out them little stick ones, and they're tossing them all over the place. And they go through 2 sticks a fucking day. And like there was a report came out that some of these things have got like 20 to 30 times more nicotine than the packaging says they have.
I heard the other day they said they were going to ban nicotine vapes to under 18s, and I thought,
wait, they're not already?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Wait, what?
So they are, but apparently nicotine vapes. That's why all the kids are buying them, because
that cannot be fucking
insane.
That can't be right, because tobacco products are 18, so like, you can't buy skins. You couldn't go in and buy like paraphernalia.
So. Yeah, you'd have thought so. I mean, let me double check, but I just heard it on the radio. Just thought that's mad. But yeah, in Australia, we've got that bongs. Bongs are illegal, so you can only sell a bong.
They're water packs.
That's right.
Do you have herbal kitchen grinders as well?
That's right.
And trucker skins.
Yeah, well, I was talking to guys in the US about this, and they say they sometimes give their devices to chefs and use them as infusers, so they can give them another. So the bongs are banned, even though they're on sale. So yeah, it's like every country. I think they've got the medical right, or at least it's a very good medical model. They've still got a lot of things wrong. But the legalization is looking very interesting, and this is where they scored they being the Legalize It party stood in the national elections last summer and got enough votes, 500,000 votes, which out of a population, a voting population of 16 million, you can see I've done my homework. 500,000 out of 60, it's quite a big percentage. And that gave them some seats at the federal level. They've also got seats at the state level. So what you're now seeing is very gradual change. One of those changes was they have a very, very strict driving law, just like we do over here. But I think it's worse in Australia in that it's like an instant ban. If you have THC,
detection is a ban, yeah. Which
of course, it's for medical consumers is a terrible paradox to have to go through.
So do the patients not have a prescription defense for having THC in their blood?
No, and that's at the crux of that's the heart of the problem.
That is a fucker. You said what, 300,000?
Yeah, and there's no equivalent of Medicard or CanCard. All of those schemes that have tried to launch in the UK with but nothing like that.
Yeah, sorry to keep pressing on this one, but so what about for other prescription drugs? Do they have a defense? So if you have tramadol, for example, for back pain or something like that.
Don't quote me on it, but I think there's exceptions for other drugs. That's why cannabis is. I
suppose if it's not federally, actually, I suppose if no, it's not federally licensed
states as well. So Victoria has a very, very strict law, and I think the Tasmania has just got rid of it. So in Tasmania they're more progressive, but these changes that are happening have started because the politician, the Legalize It party, are starting to mix with the Senate, and although there's only 2 of them, because it's a coalition, the parties with the majority need that support occasionally. And so they make concessions. And so the thing that's taught me as well is, we often argue and debate about when the UK is going to see changes to its drug laws. And it strikes me that Germany is proportional. Australia is proportional. You need proportional representation in order for something like cannabis, which, let's face it, it's a niche. It's a single party issue. That's like
to the layman, entirely.
Yeah. In order to get that into Parliament, we need proportional representation, in my view, and I've made that before. So where you've got PR in Australia, the Legalise It party have embraced it and capitalised on it, and that in turn is having positive effects for cannabis patients and users. So it's interesting to follow the political movement in Australia, because the party has been going for several years, and it's really grassroots. I mean, there's no funding behind it. It's all voluntary donations. It's people like you, who are passionate about the plant and are prepared to stand up for election. And 500,000 people agreed with them. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, I agree that we almost have a institutional apathy baked into the British pie, as it were.
Because we can't change it.
Exactly that. So people then go, why create a smaller oppositional party? All we'll do is put enemy X in power. And it's such defeatist and defranchising politics that most people are just like done with it. But
the political system we've got at the moment just doesn't work. We all know it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work for us.
The Tories in power.
Just what they
don't vote for Christmas. So why are they ever going to vote against it?
Yeah, no, I can understand that. So at least, it's good to see then so close of a country to Britain in terms of culture, history, society, even legal structure. That's to a certain and lesser degree in terms of its history rather than its modern implementation. Then same with Canada as well. There's a lot of commonality with the way that the structure of the laws coming from, I suppose, Proto-English institutions. So we can use that as kind of a partial roadmap. But as you said, these barriers being the lack of proportional representation, the House of Lords as well is another huge impediment that I don't think many people quite understand with hereditary peership. And how that kind of works. Obviously, the power of the aristocracy and the modern elite, as it were.
I'd say the elder. I mean, to be a lord, by definition, you almost have to be on the elderly side.
Previously, there's some
fact that most cannabis, the millennials have a far more open attitude than the older generation.
Well, this is the irony: is the older generation could live better lives, could live longer, could be more functional, frankly, in society. Because I mean, we've discussed this. I'm not necessarily. I wouldn't prohibit alcohol. Wouldn't go against it. But there's enough studies now that suggest if you moderately drink alcohol a few times a week, your brain is lowered. You are in. It's a neurological retardant. It takes days of not to consume it. So you had that for years.
Yeah,
it reduces empathy, sympathy, compassion. It reduces, a lot of the emotional centers of the brain processing. And again, I'm not judging anyone for this. That's your choice and your freedom, and I would fight and die for it.
Yeah,
but when they've got 12 subsidized bars in the House of Commons and Lords area, and they're drinking every day. We're finding now methamphetamine in the Home Office. There's cocaine found every other fucking week outside the Prime Minister's office. Yeah. These things affect their decision making. And I'm not then saying, as long as I'm for this, you could use all the drugs in the world. Fuck, I would love to see a Britain ran by people that have tried all the drugs and regularly do, because their worldview would be entirely different.
Yeah, rather than
we wouldn't be the world's second largest arms dealer. We wouldn't be effectively one of the world's most corrupt countries when you actually really look at the financing of the world and how London works as a private city and corporation. It's all a bit, which is why I think, let's move to Australia at this point. So
this is a fairly wide-ranging podcast, isn't it? When you
it always is. People think I'm a cannabis podcast.
On absolutely everything.
Neil, I am not a cannabis podcast. I don't know where people get this idea from. There may be a giant leaf on our logo. But this is humanity. This is what I care for, is that everything is intersectional. Cannabis cannot be a single issue, because done right, it resolves many of our problems. But unfortunately, that it means a huge wealth transfer from industries that are polluting, destroying and poisoning the earth to an industry that could regenerate it. But that it doesn't work in the same monopolistic infrastructure. Yeah, they can put it on the stock market, manipulate the shares and do all the rest of it like they do with every other, big company. But in terms of the actual the infrastructure and the outlet of it, we need, like I said, trillions of plants. And we don't need these carbon neutral goals. We don't need all of this greenwashing we're seeing with all these corporations that go, oh, well, actually what we're doing is we're protecting this amount of forest. And you look into it and it's a fucking golf course in Tennessee. It's like, you lying bastards, that was never under risk of being destroyed. You're never going to promote the wildlife in that region or protect it. It's all fugazi. It's all a lie. And I feel like cannabis is this key that opens that door. And then we explode into a new world of consciousness that I don't know what it looks like. But I know we've got a better chance of surviving if we actually use the tools we've got on this sinking ship to plug the hole. Then we can bail the water out. Then we fix the sail. And then we get back wherever the hell humanity was heading. Because right now we're facing the rocks in oblivion. And
yeah. Although, here's my own, not conspiracy theory, but theory based on no evidence whatsoever.
I love these theories. Hit me.
Yeah, which are the best conspiracy theories. Back in the 60s, when drugs were becoming more popular, and we all know about the tune in, turn on, drop out. You had a generation in the 60s who, obviously, the teen generation, were finding their voice at that time, but they were discovering drugs and they were taking drugs and they were talking about ripping everything down, not going to war, the end of the man, the end of the establishment, that we're going to do things different, it's peace and love, all the hippie ideals. But you imagine being a politician, during that time. In the 50s, you didn't hear the youth. They were quiet. They were in their box.
There's a couple of beatniks kicking around, but fuck those guys.
Yeah. They're
quiet. They're just writing books and disappearing off on the road. Leave them alone.
They had no voice whatsoever. Then in the 60s, they suddenly all took drugs and they suddenly wanted to change the world. They wanted to rip everything down and start again. Now, if you're a politician, what do? Fuck this, ban drugs. So with that, they didn't engage with the arguments. What they did is they banned drugs. And you can see it now with the protests, with the Just Stop Oil. We mentioned it. Yeah. They're not engaging with Just Stop Oil. What they're doing is banning the protests. And so it just seems like politicians, and I'm using this in a very broad sense and stereotyping every politician, but politicians, rather than whenever these things flare up, they don't engage, they just ban it. And so that's my conspiracy theories. That's why drugs are seen as being a danger to society. It's not a health issue, because we've discussed that multitude of times. They would like the tax, but what they are fearful of is this peace and love. And why do we do? Can't we all just love it? And fuck that. The arms industry is worth billions. We can keep the population fearful if we tell them that we're one step away from being wiped out. And we ban drugs because if people took drugs, they would suddenly realize. And we've gone through all that argument in the 60s and 50, 60, 70 years later, it's still affecting us today. So that's my conspiracy thing.
It's very much, it's a whack-a-mole, and they're still trying to whack that mole. And I think it's proven correct in the quotes of John Ehrlichman, the former Nixon advisor, at the start of the war on drugs. And he was quoted as saying, when he spoke to, I think, CNN in the 90s, talking about the war on drugs. And he said, did we know it was wrong? Entirely. But by associating the anti-war left and the blacks to cocaine, to heroin and to cannabis, we could vilify these groups. We could raid their properties and break up their communities and vilify them night after night on the evening news. And that was always their I've butchered that, but that was always their intention, was to use it as a tool of exactly that. They couldn't criminalize the ideas. You couldn't criminalize being against the war, but they noticed the correlation that the majority of people against the war like to smoke weed. So if they think of weed on them, or we can plant weed on them, allegedly, then you can criminalize those individuals. And the legacy of that today means the most people, the laymen in the population that don't consume drugs or interact with them and see them as the devil, when they see that person that's been criminalized for drugs, they don't associate them with radical ideas and progressing, wanting to evolve humanity. They see them as wanting to destroy and tear it down. They've been internalized the decades-long campaigns of propaganda by these governments. And
we saw it during the 80s as well, actually, didn't we? You know, when E hit the scene, and I was sort of the age, I guess, that, you know, I was out and I was going to the clubs. And I remember the football hooligans. You know, it was an enormous problem during the mid-80s. And E hit the scene around 88, 89, and suddenly all the hooligans were hugging each other. And the whole rave scene was built around the happy smiley face, taking a knee, hugging, loving each other. It was all peace and love, wasn't it? I mean, I don't know how well, but I remember it well. It was called it was the second summer of acid, wasn't it? It was
I think it's called the second summer of love, wasn't it?
Second summer of love. Yeah, well, I'm saying that because it was
because it was based on acid. Yeah,
second summer of love in 88.
Yeah, that was
again. What did the politicians do? You've got this generation who are all saying, "Look, if we take E, we can all just hug and kiss each other instead of fighting." Politicians weren't interested. Ban it. It's just
exactly that. So the fell under criminalization, and then when they couldn't criminalize the substance enough, that's when you had the 1991, 92. I think it was 91. We call it the Free Party Act, but I think it's the Public Order and Nuisance. Yeah, which basically the wording of it says that they ban the organization of 12 or more individuals with amplified music characterized by repetitive beats.
Yeah,
which is the most classist socialist kind of classist and like.
We should all dance to jazz. It's a shame we didn't all dance to jazz.
That's why they put the repetitive beats thing in it, because they didn't want to have to give up garden parties and Cheltenham and all these other high-end events where they have music. It was very specifically targeting a subculture and a group. And you're right. I mean, there's obviously a lot happened with regulations and changes in Europe around movements. There's a lot of countries work together against football hooliganism to ban and create lists that were ubiquitous and tackle. So there was that element on one side of it to actually, for once, I suppose, give law enforcement their fucking due. But yeah, a large element is to exactly that, is that you would go to a rave or a free party or a gathering of individuals, and you everything would disappear. You couldn't be fucking hateful. Especially with the first formulations. I mean, there's like 140 odd formulations you can make, I think, of MDMA. But the classic formulation that was around back in the day was the most loving, like shuddering, hug yourself of, oh my God, I'm coming up so hard. This is the best thing in the world. Like, it's just, loving, just, you're going to blow up with excitable love.
Yeah.
That
all the
again, dangerous. Violence, they know how to deal with. They've got armies, they've got teams with now big machine guns and stab-proof vests, and they have war games on weekends and train for it. They don't know how to meet peaceful individuals. This is why, again, they're trying so hard to demonize these campaign groups at the minute, rather than engaging in the conversation, as we said, because then any future activity they don't have to engage with either. And not only that, we're then the ones fighting for it. We then go, yeah, you're right, I should have got my kid to school 10 minutes earlier. This is ridiculous. Imprison them for life. What happens when the government criminalizes something that you do every day that you see as perfectly moral and justifiable? Do you know what I mean? People can't seem to grasp that they are the other. There is only us and the system. And we have to either destroy completely that system and rebuild it, or remodel that system as a way that is accountable and works entirely for us. They are civil servants. We are the society, the civilization they should serve. So something needs working at this. And I've had a lot of goes at the UK police recently. There's been some atrocious actions that they've committed. There's some amazing shit coming out of various different police forces where the heads of the forces are going, yeah, these are institutionally racist, they're institutionally classist, they're institutionally homophobic and misogynistic. These are hateful places. And these are the people that are set to police our communities. Again,
these institutions, I mean, they're like oil tankers, aren't they? They do take a long time to change. I mean, I do like to believe that society in general is including the police, you know, we learn, we experience, and we adapt, you know, and we change, and some are faster than others, and those institutions, but they do change. One of the billions of problems, and again it comes back to PR, is you have politicians who in this country, but on both sides, Labour and Tory, who've been representing the same seat for 35, 40 years. Yeah, and it just seemed, where's your new thinking? Where's your fresh blood? Where's your, we could do things differently? You don't get to be you get to be a prime minister. I think there's a 2-term limit or a 3-term limit. For a president in the US, it's 2 terms. In Germany, in France, I think it's 3. How come a politician in this country gets to sit in that job for their life? It just seems extraordinary.
Exactly.
And then these politicians come along on question time and they go, yeah, I've represented this constituency for 33 years. How come I've never heard of you?
When you go and look at that place, you go, actually, let's look at the economics of this place. You know, let's look at the crime levels of this place. You know, it's, how can you be proud to sit there if you've sat like, again, people complain there were issues in the 70s. Yeah, we had some fucking issues. But you know what? The civil mass action by the people won us everything that we enjoyed up until the market crashed in 2008. Like, we were living a pretty fucking good life up in the UK. Things were going pretty well. Obviously, we had some ideological differences and issues around certain things. Obviously, fucking Jackie Smith and everything that went on with cannabis and all that regulation aside. But economically, we were starting to get the debt under hand. Yeah, fucking Blair and the Iraq War, and that's a whole nother fucking... But in terms of investment into communities, in terms of investment in for youth, for education, you know, we still had free higher education. If things were...
Yeah, there's more money in education.
There was opportunities. You know, we were starting to get back all of the apprenticeships that were taken away by Thatcher and John Major. You know, we were moving towards a progressive thing of actually going, we need to invest in Britain to have a future of Britain. And then the Tories have just divested and asset stripped everything as fast and as hard as they could. Yeah. That now, again, like I said, the youth, the reason I think the police are struggling so much is the war on drugs. If you took drugs out of the equation, I've got no issue with the police. You catch, I've spoken on the podcast here before, look, I've been caught a few times speeding. It's a gentlemanly thing, effectively. I'm 5 miles over the fucking speed limit or whatever. You told me there was a camera. I didn't see the fucking camera. You caught me. I pay the fine. Take the fucking hit. Thank you, sir. There's no violence. There's no escalation or demonization, vilification. You are not hating on me. I have broken a minor infraction of the law. You've dealt with me as accordance. You know, and then I don't break any other fucking law. I think they're fair. Everything else is based on violence. I'm not a violent person. I wouldn't commit violence by stealing from you, by assaulting you physically or sexually. I wouldn't coerce you, which is, again, another form of violence. It's those aspects of the law there should be an institution to enforce, because unfortunately there are individuals.
Well, they're there to protect us from them.
Exactly, but most of that doesn't necessarily need to be preventative, because you can't prevent most of those things. You then have to invest in the infrastructure and mental health services and everything else to make sure that people are less likely to commit those crimes. And when they do, the police are there to catch them, bring the case to prosecution, the CPS then prosecutes them, and then the judiciary holds them and they're sentenced and they're imprisoned. And that is fair for those crimes, because I think everyone would agree it's fucking fair. But then when you look at, again, drug laws are just so backward. The reason the police are vilified, I still do it. I was doing my washing up earlier and I caught a cop car out the corner of my eye, passing between 2 houses like this, and something went up me. And I literally was like, what is it? I was like, Spidey sense. I was like, what the hell was it? And I look and I'm like, oh, it was a cop car. Like, I'm so hyper aware of the presence of police because I like drugs and I'm a drug user and I benefit from them both medicinally, spiritually, mentally, physically, that I have to have and live that way as a prisoner in this panopticonic reality. You know, it's a Jeremy Bentham's wet dream, the world that we currently live under.
You say it's a victimless crime, isn't it? Because I mean, it's it's not a crime. We both agreed, but in terms of where we're at the moment, it is a crime, victimless crime. I agree entirely. I mean,
with the crimes that are created are a consequence of prohibition. I had this argument with, of all people, Victoria Derbyshire, when I was on her show on BBC Two. I did a thing about LSD. It was really cool. I had one of their reporters, and
how long ago was that?
5 years ago.
Oh, right, okay.
And yeah, they were doing a thing about microdosing acid, so they came up and we talked, and obviously they can't be like, who do drugs, and they were kind of like, well, we were thinking, and we had this back and forth, and all right, but then took some acid with them and sat and did an interview, and they invited us down the studio, and we did this whole thing, and she kept reading. I saw a card when they sort of brought me on, and I had a second, and I saw her notes, and I was like, all right, clocked, got my answers. And she came up with this question of going, well, what do you feel about drug trafficking and the consequences of people using and normalizing these drugs? And I went, well, these are entirely the consequences of prohibition.
Yeah.
That it's not, the drugs didn't do this. The drugs are in neutral articles. In the same way, if you criminalized coffee tomorrow, do you know how many people, like my mother, are going to be on the streets, you know, itching, trying to score that coffee? It's the drugs are not the problem in society, even though when people take excessive amounts of these things and act out, etc. The drugs still didn't do that. They chose to go beyond those limits. And yeah, they may have had a temporary psychosis or whatever as an effective, let's call it an air quotes, allergic reaction, or a contraindication of other compounds together through a lack of education.
And we've all been there.
Exactly.
We've all done it.
Yeah, exactly. Through a lack of education or awareness. But then once you've done it once, you know what? You fucking learn. Oh God, right. Yeah. I don't mix ketamine and whatever. Yeah. You know, again, I'm not demonizing anyone for what you want to take, but basic education and awareness. Some things are very dangerous when you mix them together, but can also, be fun. Don't kill me. But we have to have those conversations. You can't, it's a spectrum of things here. And we need that conversation about cannabis to break open and go, okay, this one plant for some people can be a medicine, a lifesaver, suppress their epileptic fits. For another person, it's a wonderful euphoriant, and it enhances their spiritual connection to nature when they're out in the woods and having a nice joint, walking their dog. For another person, it's a grounding tool to help them cease their anxiety in a moment. You know, it's someone that stimulates appetite, it suppresses pain. It does.
Right. It's a medicine,
but it's still the same plant. So I think that's what we need to regulate. Is fuck all of the tiny. If we did that, it's going to take us a century to regulate every aspect and potential part of the plant. Again, my idea is quite radical. Deschedule the whole plant, remove all criminal sanctions for anything to do with the plant, and then just use the current laws. So, all right, if somebody fucking grows a shitload of it and then sells it at past an arbitrary level, a commercial level of taxation, and they don't pay tax, go after them for the tax, not the cannabis. Or seize the cannabis for the cash they owe you.
This was, and you're talking about changing laws and changing attitudes, and I think this is something else that I've learned over quite recently. You know, the cannabis industry, and we mentioned this in our discussion before we started recording. You know, just about the different groups and lobby groups, and the cannabis industry is still relatively young. Let's face it. You know, it was legalized in 2018. You know, that makes it a very young industry, and it hasn't even got a trade body, really. You know, there's no recognized trade, but the CIC are doing what they can to coalesce people and bring them together.
I mean, there's the CTA, the Cannabis Trade Association, the Cannabis Industry Council. The Centre for Medicinal Cannabis was trying to set us up as a regulatory body. I think it kind of pushed its efforts into the ACI, which was the Association of the Cannabinoid Industries.
Cannabinoid industry, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there are people trying to create, but because it's so large, I don't think you can regulate. This is what I pitched to Jeremy Corbyn, was the idea of basically a minister for cannabis and an institution within the government, and we effectively nationalize it, not to restrict it, but to create a body with enough influence and direction toward public good rather than just return of profit, that we could regulate those systems through pilot schemes, through other models, working in partnership with the police and local councils to maximize this. So in places where, exactly as you spoke of in Southern California, where there's shitloads of warehouses, think of the reason anyone, you consumers out there, folks, why does a lot of weed come from Birmingham? Because a lot of the industry died in Birmingham, and they have these huge warehouses and mass amounts of space to be able to clandestinely produce it. The same is true for...
You're right, actually. I've wondered why so many people from Birmingham... You just answered my question.
It's all about supply and demand and need. So basically, we need a lot of weed in this country. I think a lot of these levels of they're saying there's 1.8 million this, 2 million this. I think they're small potatoes. I think it's growing exponentially all the time, and the limitations on the growth of that market are bottlenecks in the market, where county lines networks are then cut down, and there's a village of say 2,000 people, and there's one grower that gets caught, and then there's no weed in that area. A few people will go to the internet and order it in through like the dark web, etc., and you'll get a few people go out to different areas and bring some in and try and pass it around. But it's the lack of ubiquity. Whereas I think that if we could roll it out sort of entirely.
Well, what you said about talking to Jeremy Corbyn, though, and I think that I was leading on to that point, that it's a relatively young industry. It's got the several organisations, but no really recognised trades body. And what is required in order to get all of this happening and over the line is some very, very intelligent lobbying. And I know lobbying is often seen as a negative, but the fact is, if you want a law changed in this country, there are only 650 people who can change that law. And you have to get into you have to persuade that person. I know that politicians nowadays normally just vote along the party lines, but you have to win hearts and minds of those 650 people. And that is a skill in itself. You know, you sat with Jeremy Corbyn. I would bet on an average day, he sits down with 20, 30 people, as does every politician. And every politician gets lobbied by either individuals or by companies, blah, blah, blah. It's a skill that, and you need to have half a dozen lobbyists under the higher employ of the trade body. I used to work in the music industry. The trade body was the BPI. You know, the BPI represented both majors and indies, and they had, they're called communications. They're lobbyists. Yeah, and and whenever there was a problem with they got accused of charging too much for CDs, blah blah blah, it was the BPI that fought those cases, the BPI who represented the industry in court. And the cannabis industry at the moment, I don't see it's got those lobbyists that are required to change it's got a lot of passionate people.
I think it's a lack of
lobbying is a skill.
I think it's a lack of understanding, not even like understanding, it's a lack of consensus on what direction they want to take. As I think we spoke of before, of the
I agree.
They want the outcome that they're pitching because it'll benefit them most. And I think what we need to see somewhere in the world at this point is what I've been pitching for a while, and I really don't want to have to try and put my effort into trying to do it, because I don't think I'm skilled enough to do it. I'd love to be a part of it, though. But a cannabis consumers union, we are far larger than the industry combined. You know, we always will be. We are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions strong around the world. And I think together as a body, if we got all of the cannabis smokers in the UK together, a couple of million people, and we were one voting block, we would own the politicians. We would literally go, all right, everybody, we're going to take our negotiating power to the table, and we're going to say to whoever, you fight for us on this white paper, on this set of goals that we want, we will give you our votes.
But that, again, we come down to the PR again, don't we? You know, that without proportional representation, look, if, you know, when it comes to my vote, if there was a party standing for cannabis, yeah, I'd vote for them. But if the Lib Dems or say we want to, there's a lot of issues that when we've spoken about a lot of them in this conversation. If Labour said we were going to support PR, I feel so passionately about PR, I would vote for Labour. The fact they're saying they're not going to do PR means I'm not going to vote for them, even though I am left-leaning. I am their perfect voter, really. I'm not going to vote for them because of their lack of support, Keir Starmer's lack of support for PR, and the shadow cabinet's view on drugs, which is no different to the Tory view on drugs. I just cannot get my head round. They've got an open goal for those 2 million people that you just said. An open goal.
There is so much.
They just did a Diana Ross and sued the penalty. It's like, what?
Yeah, it's, as you spoke of before, the issue is that the whips have never been stronger in the parties. And the collusion between the whip, the party chair, and the head of the party basically means that 3 people dictate what the party votes on. If you look at what happened to Corbyn, fucking Keir Starmer stood with him and said, I consider him a friend and a good colleague, and then destroyed him. I mean, it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens to the next election, because he's going to stand as an independent, and Islington are going to stand with him, and he's going to butcher whoever they put against him. And people have been saying, look, Corbyn's a contentious individual.
The next election is an all-nighter, isn't it? I mean, that is going to be the most fascinating election.
My hope is a Rainbow Coalition. We force proportional representation.
It's the only one.
Coalition after coalition. I don't think there's going to be majority. I don't think Labour can win a majority because they're betraying the youth. They look so close to the Tories on the 90% of the issues that most people go, where is the radical anything? I think the Greens, I'm still trying. I try always. I love them in terms of like the policy group that I work with and the people, but trying to get them to understand anything more than just a soundbite on decriminalization, it's not enough. People think, well, what the fuck is that? There needs to be a larger stance on it. It's Lib Dems, I think, any millennial, frankly, or any of the younger side of the millennials, because we're like a 20-year group of individuals, they remember tuition fees. They remember the first coalition. And they look at what happened after Brown and just the betrayal of it. I mean, Brown was obviously a bit more to the left than Blair, I suppose you could argue. But still more centre than most would like a left to be after what we had over the 80s and early 90s. But we've somehow course corrected and gone to almost authoritarianism. And then Labour step in and go, well, we'll stand in the centre right. And everyone goes, cool. And it's mental. So like I said, there are some smaller parties. There's like the Northern Independence Party, which I quite like a lot of their manifesto. There is, who reached out to me
Northern Indy. What are they? Where do they draw the border for the North?
I think it's above Sheffield, somewhere like that. Yorkshire
God, not gonna, I went to university in Sheffield, and if you said to them that they're not going to be part of the Northern, the new Northern nation, they would not.
I can't remember where it is, but they're quite an interesting party. Somebody else reached out to me recently. I need to get back to them, from the Breakthrough Party.
Right.
Their initial, what I saw from their bullet point manifesto, interesting. Don't know where their stance is on drugs. I might obviously dedicate some time to winding some people up in the party and being like, well, here's my thoughts and 2 cents on it, because that's what I feel to do, is because I think until exactly we have proportional representation that's meaningful enough to start a national movement, we have to find the best of the worst.
No, you have to lobby. You have to lobby. You have to do what every other industry does and lobby. And that requires... I met a lobbyist for the first time a few weeks ago. Won't name him, but he was at Cannabis Europa as well. And talking to him just brought home to me how much of a skill it is. Because if you want to change the heart and mind of someone, it's not enough just to have a 1 hour meeting and you meet with Jeremy Corbyn and you tell him what you think of drugs.
Wish I had an hour to talk to him.
That's great. It's great. But if you want to change someone's opinion, you have to get to know them. You have to know who they are as a person. You have to find out what their hobbies are and what their interests are. So the next time you see them, you say, all right, mate, how is your holiday? Or how is the cooking? Or how is the cricket go? Whatever it is. Because you can't change people's minds just by having a 1 hour meeting. It takes repetition. It takes getting to know someone. It almost takes becoming not a friend, but someone they can trust, so that when you say to them, look, I represent cannabis, and look, this is what I think. They're not just going, oh, all right, okay, well, thanks a lot.
You need to build that rapport.
That's it. And
yeah,
that's what really struck me over the last 3 months when I met this lobbyist. That shit, it's like, if we're going to change the industry, if we're going to get ahead, we have to learn those skills.
The big issue I see is that there isn't really the people that are lobbyists. Again, this might be my internalized classism. Who knows? Is that I don't really see any lobbyists from poorer backgrounds, from more socioeconomically deprived backgrounds, that are then advocating for things that are not just profit. That's I think what most people see is that.
And that's why I use the word cautiously, because they would call themselves communications. But they would call themselves, the head of communications.
But I worry that the way the systems have been set up, that the people of the disenfranchised communities are not, no offense to anybody, educated, or we don't sound right. I have quite a neutral northern accent compared to the vast majority of my contemporaries and peers. I come across quite neutral and well spoken and articulate. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm well educated. In fact, I'm not. I didn't finish fucking mainstream education. I was barely in it for most.
You're right. You've hit on a very important.
So the problem is that then those people then end up represented, and they only think about their group. Even, again, no offense to yourself, Neil, the examples you came up with before were going on holiday and cricket. I'm looking out my window, and these people are hanging on by a shoestring, a fucking shoestring. So the idea of cricket and holiday, that's luxury beyond luxury. I'm looking at my local supermarket in Tesco, and Brexit is destroying this country, man. They've taken out 3 fucking aisles, and now each week you go in, the aisles are slightly bigger. Oreos take up 3 counters.
And your Lurpak's smaller.
It's all, and so there's all this shit going on. And then they were supposed to then fight, and they're going, oh, we're going to fight for legalization. And then we go, all right, so you're going to create corporate loopholes that mean that your boys are taxed out of this country. So you're no different than asset stripping us than the Albanians that are taking 60% of their profit out of the country, or any other international cartel.
It's a good point that the lobbyists obviously have to be paid for. And so it's going to be industries that tend to pay for those people to represent their interests.
And so because
and the rec users,
and we don't dress the right way, we don't sound the right thing, we don't present in the right way, but we deserve freedom and representation nevertheless.
Yeah.
And I think so that's where there is this stymie and this issue with the growth of the medicinal market here in the UK. One of the major issue I think is combustion is a huge issue that is just pushing people like, no, fuck you. Second, it is sort of is inconsistency of supply and lack of awareness of protection. If people actually knew that a prescription, say for example, complete example here, folks, if you signed up to one of the clinics where it's a 50 quid appointment and you happen to get 10 grams, £4.50, so you paid £95, and that prescription happens to be dated for 2 months, 3 months, you've then got that protection to drive around with THC in your system for that 3 months. I think there's selling points that can't be sold on it because they're loopholes or things that the system doesn't want, but they're things that the consumer would. And so I think they're not quite gelling. And then I think there's also this continued demonization of non-medical cannabis users. I hate using the word medical cannabis because in English, it's basically a compound word, capital M, capital C, to mean the CBMP, which then the cannabis-based medicinal product is defined under HMRA regulations and the 2001 misuse of drug regulations as a cannabis-based medicinal product that designed for human consumption that is is how it starts. So it's basically that cannabis is a CBMP, meaning that all cannabis is medicinal. But so they've created this complete contradiction within the systems where I think if they could actually get to a point of liberalization and just self-identification, that's what I think the ultimate step is for the industry. The industry would win. They get millions more consumers. Yeah, they'd have to give some concessions and let us grow our own and create our own little micro pockets, but they'd still get to be Budweiser.
Yeah,
they'd still get to be Carlsberg. They'd still get to rule the world. We'd just be able to get off the marks. And yeah, even I'd still grow my own and do whatever I want. But if it was ubiquitous, I'd want to go in some places and check their quality. And if I travel to a place, I want to check out what you've got.
Yeah,
you're not going to lose consumers. You're going
to,
the economics suggest you're going to make far more money. So then it comes back to this question of, well, what are they worried about? And I think it's what you hit the nail on. It's that piece, not even necessarily the peace and love. It's curiosity. Cannabis causes metacognition and introspection. You start to think about how you're thinking. Your brain areas start to connect in ways that you wouldn't in sobriety. And so you'll end up sitting there with a joint going like, why do we only make £10 an hour when the boss has just got 2 new Porsches? You know, shouldn't we unionize? Shouldn't we like... They're scared of us being critical and thinking about our lives and the systems and mechanisms and feeling empowered and embiggened, big up the Simpsons for that word, embiggened and emboldened into acting. That is, I think, is what they're terrified of. An ubiquitous cannabis system then means that, wait, guys, why can't we pick, the mushrooms that are growing over there? Why can't I eat them? What do you mean? Like, why can't I eat them? What? And then it leads to the next question and the next question. And it's, without that mechanism of control, again, we can get together in all kinds of groups, and the worst they can do is treat us for infractions. So they, instead of coming with their machine guns and their armed like fucking battering rams and shields to raid our homes, they would have to come and knock and go, excuse me, there's a fire code infraction. You've got too many people at your ecstasy party. Here's a fine of £100. Thank you. It should be as boring and as ridiculous as that. It should be the neighbours. You've got 30 people, having coke and alcohol and a big Larry party in your back garden, and the police come out and go, "You're being a bit loud. What time? Oh, as long as you're done by 10 o'clock." It should be as banal as all of that. It should just be. That's the reality I'm going to spend, frankly, probably the rest of my life fighting for, because I've experienced that at free parties, at festivals, at different locations around the world with groups of people that have broadened my horizons. As you said, that I've experienced love and joy, connection with, that I want the youth to have these. I don't want them to be left with all these new alphabet drugs and all this other stuff. That I want to have the genuine experience of not just cannabis and not just all the cannabis can give, but all that life can give. And frankly, I think that if we don't win cannabis in the right way, which this does lead me on to a question about Australia, we end up with a problem of monopolization. So like Australia's just basically said that they've recognized MDMA and psilocybin as psychiatric drugs, but that means that, again, there's going to be this line between it. The people that are gathering together and sweating in the woods, 200 of them crying, revealing childhood trauma to each other and going, "Man, I never thought like rah," and just talking shit all night, you know what I mean, and really bonding with another bunch of people. Versus that, it's $5,000 and a male and a female psychiatrist in a neutral room with a blindfold on for 5 hours. You're not going to get the same effect. It's not good. Yes, it will help in certain ways and there's benefit, and I'm not shitting on it. But again, you're creating an artificial system where that is wrong. Raw human connection with other people is wrong, but paying an exorbitant amount, like the psilocybin clinics in Oregon that have just come on board. They're paying nearly $4,000. No, sorry, $5,000 for 4 grams of mushrooms. It's
it is expensive, and you're right. I mean, it could. It reminds it makes me feel the same way I do about Transform, and I'm sure you know about Transform, Steve Rolls and those guys, we
had Danny Kushlik on the other
year. And I've got the book and I read through that, and I agree with a lot of what they say, and I disagree with some of like the corporate side. They keep citing the alcohol industry, and like I said, I actually think you can look at the alcohol industry and think actually it works pretty fucking well. The point is, they are dealing with politicians. They're a consultancy, and they go around the world consulting with politicians, and they get these changes made that are not ideal, but for all the reasons we've just discussed. They're trying to figure out how far they can push politicians and how far they can push the law. And there's psilocybin and MDMA, like you've just said. It's far from ideal, but it's a step forward. And sometimes you think, fuck, if I, why are Transform advocating this cannabis club model and not? But it's because they know that that's an easier sell to a politician than just blanket recreational, which frankly is not going to fly.
It's narrowing their fears. At the minute they're hearing decriminalization, and this is their reality. Whereas if you can narrow it down and go, this is what it means and this is what it looks like. It's the same with the police. It's giving them reasonable grounds to back down. They can't just back down and be shown to be impotent.
That's right.
And incompetent in their position. They can never admit fault in this. They have to be infallible. They can say, the times have changed, the X, Y, Z, but it has to be a gradual process, so they're not deemed.
Yeah, it is,
or not questioned in any which way,
And so I guess in response to, will this create a two-tier system? Possibly. Is that what we want? No. Could it be done better? Yes. But could you have got Australian politicians to agree to let the kids take as much? No. So it's a step forward. It's not ideal. And if the results are positive and lots of people benefit from the expensive treatment, you would hope that over the next few years you would gradually see an easing of making it more widely available. That's the hope, isn't it? So
my hope is that the medicinalization of entheogenic compounds that we're seeing currently occurring post sort of cannabis legalization, air quotes legalization in various regions, will lead to a wider conversation of, well, if it's okay in this setting for this person, why isn't it okay for that person in that setting? If then the issue is that, the compound that they've got isn't registered or licensed, well, regulate the supply. If the problem isn't people gathering in music and like we used to have an end of summer beach party when we were youngins for like 10 years. We'd go up to one of the northern beaches in Scotland. One of the lads would bring a sound system, about 20, 30 of us. We'd take drugs and drink all night. We'd watch the sunrise. People would snooze out throughout the day and then just drive off in the afternoon. And it would be us all coming together for the last of like the festival season or parties or whatever we've been doing. There's a lot of musicians and different people. And
nice.
we'd really enjoy the space. And that's sacred to me, in the same way that going to the woods and taking mushrooms and DMT and changa and various other things around a fire and having that spiritual reconnection to nature. It's such a spectrum that if you try and pigeonhole it, people will take it elsewhere. I think this is what we've got with that acceptance of alcohol is, again, you can buy it in every shop. I mean, I agree with the Dutch. I think the Spanish have got it pretty much down. You can go buy a beer wherever you can buy pop. You can just walk and drink a beer. Obviously, if you're then drunk and disorderly, it's dealt with. So it's about putting the individual responsibility, again, that the cannabis detection in driving I have an issue with, because detection isn't a determination of impairment. Most other illicit currently criminalized substances have at least a minor correlation. So being detected in it means that you will likely be impaired in so much way. I still think there should be a field sobriety test, but that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying like all drugs for driving, but I think there should be an attitude of that if you choose to take that, if you choose to microdose some mushrooms and go to an event and no one knows, where's the harm in that? If you then need, like I did for a small time when I was younger, I had quite a problem with amphetamine when I was in my teens, because I was basically treating as an out and out ADHD and mental health conditions.
Well, that was speed. You just taking speed.
Yeah, which is basically what Ritalin is. It's like 2 molecules away from Ritalin. I mean, you had this disagreement with Ed Rosenthal about, well, methamphetamine.
Quite an independent drug to take a lot of every day, though, right?
Yeah, a large scale, hell yeah, yeah. At small scale, no. If it's then like microdosing, mixing into like a cup of tea or whatever, in the morning, it's
just gave you just like wide eyes and
that'd be more energetic, but it just allowed for. I suffer with too much stream of consciousness. It's just so many things at once, just thinking about so many different things.
I hear that so many times.
And it would always just, and I could go, I'm doing this now.
Yeah.
And then finish the task and then go and do another task. And it was like, what the fuck? Whereas like now I'm writing 2-3 blogs at a time. I'm working this and the other, and I flow wherever I can and I get what I can do. And
it's a really
it sucks, and it really, really struggle with it. Yeah. And I think more people are struggling with their focus because of social media, modern technology. Lockdown fucking destroyed us all, like in terms of our circadian rhythms, our timekeeping skills, our ability to time manage, to even like our anxiety around social situations, being with each other, our want to be with each other has been suppressed. It's really kind of harmed us. But again, it's like, if somebody chooses to do that, I've got no problem. And I think that they deserve safe access to that substance. So either that means that they need so they need either testing, ubiquitous testing, where everyone can get anything tested anonymously at any time. My ideal would be postal service. You can send up to X amount of X compound to X address. They test the thing anonymously, and you get a fucking email or whatever with the details.
One of the reasons I know we were scheduled to do this talk last week was because we had an emergency postal situation where a package had been confiscated. And when they looked at who had signed for the package, it was like PC Plod. It's like, oh no. So yeah, sure enough, that had to be dealt with. So yeah, absolutely. The fact that you can't post all of these drugs is just ridiculous. So no, totally agree. I feel like we could just keep talking, mate. But at some point, I'll have to do some work.
Can I give you two more quick fire questions, then I'll let you go, because it's been a bit the way we've recorded this, got it done, but it's been a brilliant conversation. So yeah, you've recently partnered. I say you personally, you haven't. Relief Group partnered with Drug Science for Project 21 in Australia.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago.
Oh, it was a couple of years ago. I thought it was more recent.
Yeah, no, we became the Australian arm branch division, but it was a lady called Kylie O'Brien who was our chief was, because she's left. We still work together. She was preeminent in Australia as being she's a professor. I should give her full title. Professor Kylie O'Brien. So she is a scientist who knew the drug science team over in the UK. She does what they do in Australia, which is advocacy, lobbying. She's worked with cannabis for many years, and really is very passionate about the benefits that cannabis can bring. So I think when drug science were looking for partners in different countries, then Releaf became the partner for drug science, and we're ostensibly doing the same thing that they do here. It's approaching patients and asking them to feed back, why they take cannabis, did it help? That's it, isn't it? Why do you use it? Does it help? Yes or no? And so yeah, we feed our information back to the drug science guys.
That's good to know. Obviously, with Australia having a much larger data set, I suppose, because I was concerned so recently when I heard the quite limited numbers for the signups for
very low, hasn't it?
For drug science. I think it
surprised everyone.
3,500, something like that.
Yeah.
Which again, I think is a massive issue around combustion is a problem here, and it's if then the patients are lying and getting it on prescription for vaporization and then combusting it and then giving back it data, they're corrupting the studies. Yeah. And it's going to give false positives, and that's something I'm really worried about. I want transparency and honesty. I see my combustion and cultivation of cannabis to consume in blunts is equally as valid. I can see why a doctor wouldn't recommend it, but I also see why lawfully I should have the right to refute that recommendation, because it isn't a direction, it's a recommendation by definition. I have the choice in the language at least, but not in this instance. Yeah. So I think there's some things that could be done. So
I saw Dr. Maria De Forte at Cannabis Europe a couple of weeks ago, who obviously is the woman who's done a lot of research into the association between cannabis and psychosis, cannabis in young people and psychosis. Mm-hmm. And she's got this Cannabis and Me study. She was given £2.5 million to do a survey.
think I saw Vault-based
Says
launch that
that
recently.
she's just struggling to get cannabis and non-cannabis smokers to sign up, and of course the problem, not problem, if you're a doctor in psychosis, you can sign up all your patients, but you're going to have 100% association. So you're going to go, okay, well, 100% of my patients take out and they've got psychosis. There you go. You can only do the study if thousands of people who take cannabis or don't take cannabis also do the study, so that you can see what percentage you're talking about and the prevalence and the likelihood. So unless everybody signs up, she's saying, look, and she knows the limitations of the study unless she gets thousands of signups. So that's something else we have to encourage cannabis users. Maybe you don't like the study, but unless you sign up, we're not going to have the data.
It is on my many lists of things to check out. I did see, I think it was either Prohibition Partners or Vault-Face had sort of covered the launch of it, and I think I think that if it controls for tobacco and other variables, where did you buy this? Is it home cultivated? Do you know if it's organic? What nutrients, etc.? Yeah. If there's the other variables and factors, it'll be useful. If not, it'll end up the same as that metadata analysis that the Americans recently did on Denmark, that people are quoting as saying shows a prevalence increase of risk of psychosis, which it just doesn't. When you skew down into the data and actually look at the study itself, that's not what it is stating. Yeah. There is an anomaly within the data set, but it doesn't control for these variables. Like I said, of tobacco, 70% of Europeans mix tobacco with their cannabis. Therefore, we're not getting a true indication of what cannabis is doing. If you don't control for that variable, the data thereafter is useless. So any conclusions and results are speculative at best, but these are used by the press to obviously present a certain narrative that smoking cannabis is dangerous, but vaping medical cannabis is safe. And it's just, I worry about these false binaries and the demonization and vilification, because every patient, before they discovered, air quotes, medicinal cannabis, they were just consuming cannabis. And you know how they know it worked? Because that cannabis helped them. So what's the difference here? Like you're saying I like the Australian doctors being kind of more of a gatekeeper in a certain way, but I think it should be flipped on its head in my ideal. And you should go 18, have like an NHS kind of MOT like you do when you're younger, and the check that you're growing right, your proportions, etc. You have a similar thing, and they go, okay, we're going to do this panel. And as we were saying before about seeking that gene for a high propensity towards, say, COPD, we can check for that in a gene. Yeah. We can check towards some forms of psychosis in a gene. We can check towards some other illnesses that are parallel or have symptoms, primary symptoms of psychosis. So we can check for a lot of those things and kind of rule them out, and then again present a recommendation to this individual. And that would be my ideal, is informed consent. And then cannabis can be available in the same way that peanuts are available, but the people who are allergic to it know about it, carry an EpiPen, and everything has to lawfully be labeled. And so I think the same thing should be true. That in the ideal,
science is there. Like we were saying, I think there's a moral and ethical. But if you were saying it's voluntary, if you want to know, then scientifically it's possible today, right? I mean, you okay. So we haven't. I mean, Dr. Maria is still looking at what the causes and associations are. She hasn't ruled out that there is a genetic predisposition. She says that's quite possible. So if it is, I'd like to know. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it?
I mean, the difficult thing then comes after is the acknowledgement of epigenetic triggers. So the environmental factors, if
massive,
we basically look at it as you're a system of, imagine for my listeners here, you're playing a PlayStation 1 game and you're creating a character. You've got all those little bars and you can change them and it changes the configuration of you. The same thing is true of your genes. And in the same way that you can start your game, pause the game, and then change some of these setups and it changes the function of your character, or you add extra stats and different things change of the character. The same is true. So you can be born with a predisposition towards something, but then not have environmental factors to trigger that and turn on that gene. And the same way you can be born with, like I said, with the gene, but then have environmental factors that suppress the gene. And so it's that fluid mechanism again, is that not all these people that currently, when they do consume cannabis, that do have some temporary transitory psychosis episode, means they will always suffer from it. It may just mean that they are stressed in their life. And I'm not just talking about stress, as I'm worried about it. Like they have extreme stress or distress or trauma or other mental health conditions that are then it's triggering this. That's what I meant about primary symptoms of other conditions.
Yeah, well, I think we've seen in the data, haven't we, that those most at risk are young, male, urban. They're living in the cities.
And I think a lot of that
doesn't make sense, does it? You go, well, why wouldn't a young girl living in the countryside, if it was genetic, if it was purely genetic, you would think that everybody had the same chance, and a girl living in the countryside would be no different to the guy living in the city. But it is. And so it just makes you, okay, there's that environmental factors that we need to understand.
There's adulteration of supply as well, which seems to be more prevalent in inner city areas. So we are seeing synthetic cannabinoids like HHC, THCP sprayed onto air quotes industrial hemp, and then being sold as XYZ. Same with adulterations. And a lot of these studies are not controlling for that variable of synthetic cannabinoid receptor antagonists and other semi-synthetic cannabinoids like Delta 8, Delta 10, etc., where we don't know what these do in isolation. So yeah, there's so much more that needs to go there, but it needs an unpacking. And I think that it's frustrating because we've got all these studies and all these movements in different areas, but to me it feels we just need a pilot. We need some area where we just go. And obviously we spoke of that can't happen in a vacuum, so there'll be spillover and problems, etc. But as long as we can just show that over X amount of time the world doesn't end, because the Brits are now going, well, if it didn't come from Britain, we're not going to look at the information. You know, we don't trust the Americans, the Canadians, the Uruguayans, anyone that's done it now. It's got to be a British study. And you're like, well, how can we do the British study if you guys are not letting us? And so again,
everyone insists on doing their own placebo gold standard trial, and it's why can't you just accept the one in France or the one in Peru? Do we not trust those people, or can we not just take their results?
Have you not heard? French cannabis is dangerous, terrifying. Beat you with a baguette in the middle of the night.
It's drives you mad.
It is. Yeah, it's an oddity. I'll ask you this final question because it is the final question I ask all my guests.
Okay.
So yeah, you're getting there. I'll let you go in a minute. Big question, as always, is what does the future hold for you?
That's a very good question because there's actually a lot of directions we could go in at the moment, from the medical in this country. I mean, on my days, I'll be speaking to Australia in the morning, South Africa, Israel, Thailand during the day, and then Canada later in the evening. So it's a global industry. It's fascinating. I love the politics. I love that's why we've just spent the best part of 3 hours talking, because I do genuinely enjoy talking about all these aspects. So which direction are we going to go in? We're talking to festivals. We're talking about should we go to Thailand? Should we do more in Thailand? Should we go and what can we do in Germany? There's markets, although it's painfully slow, although there's all these challenges and everyone in cannabis laughs about the length of time it takes, and that nothing's ever sure. These opportunities, it's a very, very in some ways, it's a very rapidly moving industry that we said is still very young. And it's underpinned, of course, but by the community, who have, I'm a relative newcomer in terms of, I've been a consumer, not a heavy consumer, but I've consumed since the age of 18. But I've only worked in cannabis for 3 years, mind you, in an industry that's only 6 years old.
You're a veteran.
That makes me a veteran.
Yeah.
So yeah, honestly, we want to grow Releaf, but Mull, which we haven't touched on much, is our lifestyle cannabis. So we're growing Mull as a brand. We're filming content constantly. Gary McKenzie, who's the founder, he released this video called Mull Trekker. When he went to Thailand, he went to visit the cannabis farms up in northeast Thailand, and the guy said, "Yeah, we'll meet you at the airport," and he met him at the airport in northeast Thailand, and it still took 8 hours from the airport. This shows you how big Thailand or how bad its roads are. And these guys have been growing for 40 years. Now they want to export. So they've got the Thai stick, the original Thai stick, all the original strains, and they want to export. So there are opportunities like that. I'm hopefully, fingers crossed, going to the Kush Mountains with Landrace Genetics, who every October go out to Pakistan and put out an Instagram post a couple of years ago saying, "Does anyone want to come with me?" And I went, "Yeah, I will." Now I thought, this is like on the border of Afghanistan. Apparently, there are still incursions. The border is fluid. Let's put it that way. There are still incursions of Taliban into what is Pakistan. But all the Kush Mountains are in the north of the country, and I've been invited to go on a 2-week expedition to go and see the home of the Kush plant. And it's just like, yeah, okay, so I want to do that. So yeah, I should do another podcast after that if I come back. I'll tell you all about the Kush Mountains.
Yeah, man, for sure. Yeah, I've was invited to Pakistan not that long ago, by a similar sort of company. Maybe same company, but we'll maybe talk about that off the record.
Probably.
And yeah, it's fascinating for what it seems that a lot of these people are trying to do there. There's been a lot of exploitation for many years of these heirlooms and land races in these regions, and obviously, frankly, that kind of area is where we get the divergence point of classic cannabis, to use a butchered way of describing it, as it came off the plateau and moved sort of through the west through human intervention and moved into these more arid places. We got some really different expressions of sort of the plant of it adapting, that's got some really wonderful features that I think things. I've written an article for Weed World about this that could be bred back into modern genetics and cultivars, like drought resistance. A lot of them have a low capacity for water. They produce quality flower, high cannabinoid ratio, terpene ratio, but they're producing it with a lot less water. So I think a lot of these
it's nuts, but it's actually desert.
Proper desert, yeah.
Very low rainfall.
So and then into the winter, I was it sent a lot of photos. There's a lot of stuff I can't publish from the various people because it obviously identified the farmers and they're clandestine, and it's still highly criminalized in various regions.
Yeah, no, they gotta be careful.
But they put up like their Hindu Kush, they stack them in crosses and they use the snowfall to like basically to freeze the trichomes and then beat them, and it's there like fresh freezes.
It's the same as live russet. So they've been doing that for years, whereas bubble hash and the live rosin, is a relatively new thing, because we've just figured out that we freeze the trichomes, it keeps the flame. Well, they've been doing that in the Kush Mountains for 50, 60 years.
This is what we were saying before about the technology, and it's reinventing the wheel all over the place. And I think we can get a lot forward if we just everyone got a wheel right now. What the fuck do we want to attach it to? That's what we need to think. Whereas at the minute, it's like, no, it needs to be square. Tell them it's square. Make ours round it. It's square. And we're all just fucking each other over for what? Whereas if we could all figure it out, we can move forward. So, yeah, for sure. Definitely would love to get back on at some point, brother, because we could talk about this indefinitely, I think.
Seems so.
So yeah, I'll let you get off and do some work, sir. But it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers, mate.
No worries. Take it easy, brother. Peace. Bye. Well, there you go, folks. That was Neil Cartwright from Releaf Group Ltd in Australia, and Mull Cafe, their lifestyle brand as well, their sister brand. For all we didn't really talk much about it. Yeah, that was enjoyable. We covered an incredible amount of subjects. We had a little bit of an issue in the middle there where we lost a couple of hours due to unforeseen events, but we jumped back in. I think we continued the conversation pretty well there. And yeah, we covered some great topics. There's still a few things off my list that I didn't get to cover. But as we discussed, there'll be definitely an excuse to get back in the future. There's a lot of ground to cover there. I do apologize for the amount of politics in that. If yeah, I know some people maybe watch or listen to this podcast and don't really do it for the politics, more for the cannabis and the drugs. But as I've said, it is all intersectional. It is all connected. And we have to know as much as we can about these things in order to be informed and make wiser decisions as to what it is we can do to hopefully liberate ourselves from the confines of prohibition, because I'm bored of having that moment that I described earlier with the cops in the corner of my eye. I don't want to feel criminalized, to be vilified, and yeah, have such prejudice levied upon me by the state and the system. It's not good for one's mental health. Anyway, folks, if you enjoyed this podcast, do give us a like, a share, a subscribe. Yeah, check us out on all social media platforms at the Simpa Life. Give them a like and a follow if you wish. For all I'm not really posting on many social media platforms at the minute. I'm kind of having a digital detox in some ways for while I'm still working and doing various things and putting content on the Simpa Life website. Yeah, I'm a bit frustrated with the state of the world, and I can't just keep putting up rants on social media where I'm just saying fuck this and fuck that. It's not conducive to meaningful discourse and debate. It's just me ranting effectively, and I think I do enough of that on this podcast. So yeah, if you really enjoyed this, check us out on patreon.com. Also, yeah, check out simpalife.com for more blogs, content, various other things. There's a few different areas I will be onboarding over the next few weeks and months on the website as well. And yeah, we'll be back next week with somebody, the awesome, and you'll enjoy it. All right, peace and love, folks.